my technology. I won't like do those videos, so I'll do that the other day. My more new laptop did a few weeks ago, which is a bit of a cheaper one. And one of the things to do this courses on the design one of them, and then what's by Adobe. I don't know what they're things they have thing like that. It's one of those ones where it's quite powerful enough to sort of play back what you're always looking at. Something like that, it's like you get stuck.
I do feel like this is going to be one of those shows where it's an education for me, learning about some of the staples of old days.
Maybe. I don't know how old I'm going to be going.
Okay, fair enough. I have a rehearsal at 6:30 as well, so I'll have to go a little bit before then. Not that
yeah.
Just in case. Yeah, mine is definitely very much a modern WWE. Well, hello everybody.
Oh, good thing we weren't saying anything too controversial then.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sam, and I'm back.
Hello, everyone. I'm back, and I'm Dave.
The greatest stables. So stables and tag teams. So I would allow sort of any teams of just two that were sort of influential or could be considered some of the greatest as well.
Okay. So, for example, you could say that you preferred the DX of more modern days, where it was just Triple H and Shawn Michaels, or you could say that you preferred the DX of old days, where it was the whole big faction with the Road Dogg, Billy Gunn, X Pac, China, all the whole shebang. You could say either of those. You could blend them all into one if you wanted, but if you wanted to separate them, you can. If you prefer the Hardy Boys without Lita, because obviously I think that would then be Team Extreme, wouldn't it? Would be with Lita. You could go with that as well. Okay. Throw a curveball then on my list then. So I've got mostly factions.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes I think it's a bit of a safety in numbers, and I think there are some wrestlers that just work better as a team. You know, because I know for me as an example, I know I'm not a wrestler, but I definitely find that I bounce well off other people when I'm performing on stage or something like that. So some people do just work better with other people. They can bounce off of them. They can sort of mesh moves together as well to make them a super move, so to speak. So there's lots of different things like that that come into it. Of course. We've had Goldberg on this podcast. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think in many ways it's the established sort of people trying to bring up the newer guys and trying to mould them into their own sort of way. So very much like maybe like you and me, Dave, are sort of trying to mould the young Sam into something and then go off and form his own podcast, his own little trio of podcasters, you know, and that sort of thing. So kind of that sort of respect, I think. Yeah, it's a good faction, a good stable is. I think it's that mixture of the established and the not established yet that are going to be hopefully brought up in that respect. And there's plenty of stables over the years that have done that well, and a lot more that have not done that well. But we will maybe talk about that. Smash it.
New Days were probably one of the biggest ones.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's quite one of the few examples of a stable that's just stayed exactly as they have been from the start. I mean, not in terms of the gimmick as such, but certainly just of them being a 3-man team, like you say. So it sort of like started off. It was completely not at all what it is now, with sort of Xavier sort of like being the sort of like I don't know, trying to give Biggie and Kofi like an edge to them and things like that, and sort of like to I don't know, sort of like bring up. It was sort of like, I think people were expecting it to be like a new Nation of Domination, weren't there? Something like that. I think they'll do something like that. Oh, right.
Really?
It's all right. We're just talking about the stables, about the New Day and everything. Yes, so I say when they sort of started off, there was rumours they were going to be a bit like the Nation of Domination and that sort of thing. Obviously, that and then they suddenly went off television when they didn't really do anything for a little while. And then suddenly came back as a sort of like a preacher gimmick with their videos they were doing for a while. And then that got just rioted, like booed out the building most of the times. But luckily, they rolled with the punches and went with it, and then suddenly turned into this really popular trio. And as I say, just a strong thing for the fact that they've remained as the three of them with no additions, no taking away. I think that's quite admirable and rare in this day and age.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm back, bitches! So, hopefully you can hear me now. So this will be one I'll have to edit to make an audio thing out of this. But thank you in the comments for letting us know. Colin Reed.
Colin Reed.
Yes, hello, Colin. Good old Colin. You saved me there. But yeah, it's I can't remember what you were saying, Dave.
About the New Day.
The New Day, yeah. They did start off with the more preacher-like gimmick, and from what we understand from what they've said in interviews and things, it was thought that they were going to be really popular, and it's obvious that they weren't going to be popular with that kind of gimmick, and so they turned it around and they made themselves so unpopular that they ended up becoming popular again.
Yeah.
Power of positivity.
Yeah. And it's like they wouldn't have ever had the theme music, which is iconic now that they've got, if it wasn't for the fact that they'd had that sort of get everyone to clap along sort of thing going. But that now goes into what they've got. And what was the name? I forget. Xavier Woods. What was the name of his trombone?
Oh, what was it? Francesca?
Francesca. Yeah, that's it.
it.
I think so. Like Lucille is the name of the bat in The Walking Dead, but I knew it was something like that. Right. But yeah. So what are the other modern stables we've got? Are there any more in WWE?
Seth Rollins sort of running one at the moment, isn't it?
Do they have a name?
I don't know what the team name would be, but I know obviously he's higher and he's recruiting more and more people as he goes along.
Yeah, because it's sort of like it's Seth's a lot and it's Zelina Vega's a lot as well, isn't it? That's sort of like having a stable but not really having a name behind it. And it's interesting not very interesting what they're doing in terms of that. It's just give them a name, give them a purpose, you know.
Yeah.
But then again, I don't really necessarily mind that because Zelina Vega's sort of thing of just having a lot of talent under her wing could be like almost reminiscent of like Bobby Heenan back in the day, where it wasn't necessarily a name; it was just they were just known as the Heenan family.
Well, that is. Hang on, isn't that a name?
Family, you know?
That's a name. They were the Heenan family.
Yeah, but they were never like officially announced as the Heenan family. It was always what his little collective sort of thing for it. But I never really remember anything being said they are the Heenan family, you know.
Yeah, true, yes. So I'm trying to think. So in NXT we got the Undisputed Era.
Yep.
Of course, yeah, great fashion.
Yeah, and so it will be interesting. Do we expect that they'll make it to the main roster as a faction, or are they going to end up being split off into bits and pieces?
I think it's one of those things where it depends on kind of what they want to do, because I've read various different things, and one of the things I've read is that they would prefer to stay on NXT, which in that case would mean they almost sort of have to split off into separate directions. Otherwise, it would just reach a point where they can do no more. They've already held all of the titles in NXT, so what else can they do as a faction?
Yeah.
So I think NXT is probably like the best fit for them, but at the same time, like I say, they've literally just done everything. They've had the titles, and depending on whether or not Adam Cole retains this weekend or not,
of course,
it'll depend on what happens there, really. I think once he's lost that title, there's not much more they can do, and they'll have to probably do something else. And I guess if there is an advantage to them doing all their in-house stuff, then that is that they can just sort of experiment and then sort of put them on to other shows and without necessarily having without an audience to gauge. It's sort of like they're able to sort of just do things and and just go with what they think is making a good TV, I guess. And if Undisputed Era can do that without being crapped on by the crowd, which there's no reason why they would be.
Yeah, I don't think they would be.
Then they could go with that because there's a lot of Raw and SmackDown at the minute is teaming with a lot of guys that you wouldn't expect to be put out in front of a crowd at the moment, and indeed haven't been yet. Austin Theory, for example, is suddenly been in like 2 different stables so far on Raw, and hasn't actually been in front of a crowd in that respect yet.
I'm not even 100% sure that he was in front of a crowd before he went up to the main roster either, because he was on NXT. I'm not sure. Oh no, because he did a Christmas Day special against Roderick Strong. He had a match there, so he had.
He was in the last couple of tapings, but it wasn't like doing anything important.
Yeah.
Are there any others in WWE? Imperium.
The Imperium, yes.
Like the Ring General.
Yeah, they're very much based off of the previous sort of thing that Volta and co were doing in WXW in Germany called Ringkampf. That's sort of like the thing of.
I wonder why they didn't use that name.
Pardon?
I wonder why they didn't use that name.
Well, no, it's not. It's I don't know. It's obviously the camp. It's got an unfortunate connection to something, but actually the actual name's actually quite innocent. But sort of, but their whole thing was what they say in the Imperium thing of the matter is sacred. The matter is heilig, I think is the way they say it. And yeah, that was pretty much the same thing. So Ringkampf was like Volta, Axel Dieter Jr., who is Martel Bartel, Alexander Wolf, and Timothy Thatcher. They're the Ringkampf guys, and they've obviously all sort of just taken that same sort of characterism and put them into this Imperium thing, which I think has actually worked really well. I really like them as a faction.
Definitely, I agree with that, and it obviously is showing because Volta is WWE UK champion. And Imperium have obviously just won the tag team championships in NXT as well. So they're going not only winning more than one title within the group, but they're going across countries as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do we again Imperium? Like I've heard things that suggest that Volta doesn't really want to be on the road in America with WWE full time. So does that limit the potential of Imperium as a faction?
Yeah, it could go either way. I mean, obviously, if they are going to try to go full belt with it, then they're not going to have to do it with Walter really, because he's very much. I think they took a long time to sign him because they were trying. He was very much of the thing of I just like to wrestle. I don't want to go travel all around the world all the time, full time. I'm happy. He's happy where he is. And it took them a while to sort of like reach an agreement with him that suited them all. So I don't think he'll be like around with them much longer, to be honest. If whenever they go back to live events, and he won't. He's not going to be. He's not like a long-term signee because he just likes to wrestle. He likes to have everything simple and likes to do everything in terms of classic wrestling. But at the same time, though, when you do get him. And you do get into like these sort of bigger events, it's more of an event, I suppose. And hopefully they can treat him as more of a sort of special attraction, certainly more than they did at the Survivor Series where he got beaten in 3 minutes, but let's not talk about that. So yeah, but knowing the sort of like the attitude of Volta as I do, is sort of like I can sort of see it going either way, but I don't think he necessarily cares in the best possible way that much in terms of that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start saying about like what we think are some of the greatest factions of all time. Sam, you can start us off.
Yeah.
You can nominate one. We can say who we think are our favourites, or we can save that till later. I don't mind.
Well, 2 of mine have actually already been, or 3 of mine have actually already been mentioned in the early parts of this conversation, which is quite nice.
Yeah.
Do this real quick.
Well, it's all good. We're just rattling through them. That's not a problem at all.
Oh, we can bring them up again. We can go round in circles.
Yeah, no worries. I'm going to go with The Shield. That's my first one. Yeah, bit of that.
There we go. Yeah.
One of these ones where sort of they were kind of the first team, as far as I remember, to come up from NXT when it actually became more of a developmental ground rather than sort of a game show as it was before.
Yeah.
And they came in. They were the Hounds of Justice, and they were one of these ones. It was always fun the fact that they came in through the crowd rather than just everyone coming down the ramp as always. It was one of these ones where, like, as soon as their music hit, you'd hear the dun dun, and you'd know that something was about to go down, which was always really cool. And they just came in, and as nobodies, they sort of just came in and beat everyone up, and they were sort of pushed very quickly. They were tag team champions with Reigns and Rollins. At the same time, Dean Ambrose was United States champion, and it was all sort of within the first year or two of them actually being on the main roster. And obviously, there was, when it was Dean Ambrose in the WWE, there was always calls for them to go back to it as well. So yeah, I think the Shield are one of those ones that they kind of, they're definitely one of my more modern like number one teams.
Yeah, I like the Shield overall. It's an interesting thing because when they first came in, I believe, kind of with CM Punk, where CM Punk was, they were assisting CM Punk, but CM Punk was saying that these guys are nothing to do with me. They're just doing their thing, and it's just happens to be benefiting me. And then I believe later on it was revealed that they were in, cahoots, as we all suspected, with Punk. And they were very, very dominant for a long time. But what was interesting is, like, from the early days, it seemed like Ambrose was the singles wrestler, and the others, and Rollins and Reigns were then the tag team. And just how they developed, it was funny that Ambrose was the last to actually really make it to the main event out of them. But yeah, they were a very good faction team. I think just obviously now, over what's happened over the last couple of years with, first of all, Dean Ambrose leaving WWE, now being Jon Moxley, that's kind of, I think, I worry that the reunion of the Shield, I think, had Roman Reigns was during when he had to go off sick, and then they tried to bring it back, and then someone might have been injured. So they never really did the Shield reunion enough to kind of cement its legacy, the same as when DX did its reunion and some of these other things. But for its initial run, up until obviously Rollins turned heel, yeah, very dominant faction.
Yeah, and just the fact that all three of them have been world champions, all of them have been multiple-time champions across all of the different titles there are. I'm pretty sure all of them are actually Grand Slam champions, which shows how good they are as individual wrestlers as well as a team. Yeah. And even there was one night, I can't remember which pay-per-view it was, but all three of them were world champion on the same night.
Does that mean that one had to defeat the other? How does that work?
Yeah, so it wasn't when they were a team. Seth Rollins had just come back from injury. Yeah. When before the injury, he had the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. While he was away, Roman Reigns won it. Then they had a match when Seth Rollins came back. Seth beat him, and then Dean Ambrose cashed in Money in the Bank on Seth. Ah,
yeah. Vaguely rings a bell. I can't really remember that. I should do. So all three of them were the same champion on one night.
Yes.
Amazing. I'd completely forgotten that happened.
Yeah,
Dave, what's your thoughts on the Shield?
Yeah, I really enjoyed them for the most part. I think even though you'd say that they didn't necessarily cement their legacy on this, so like when they tried to bring them back, I think that kind of helps them a little bit, so then they didn't overdo it to too much of an extent. Even though I did think that sort of like them doing it towards the end when Ambrose was leaving may have not entirely been necessary, but that's more to do with the fact that they couldn't do anything with Ambrose when he was heel for some strange reason. I don't know why they couldn't, but maybe he was just too popular with the crowd. I don't know, but for whatever reason, it didn't work. But yeah, no, just echo what you guys said. I think they've been they were just of the sort of like the sort of new talent that they were throwing out at the time. I think for whatever reason, these three just managed to make it stick, and they've obviously managed to cement a bit of a legacy behind them. So good on them.
Yeah, but you know what? Okay, so why did they work? I think it's fair to say that from the start, the one that was the greenest and the least experienced was Roman Reigns. And he, though, was the heavy of the group. He was the big one, even though he's not significantly bigger, but he's the most muscular of the three. So he's kind of fit more into the role of a little bit in the background, cousin of The Rock, so pedigree and stuff there. But Rollins previously, Tyler Black in Ring of Honor, Dean Ambrose previously on like the indie scene, CZW as John Moxley. And so they'd got real wrestling ability. Then put into a storyline coming in with CM Punk whilst he was on the absolute top of his game. And also the fact that, like you say, they would come in through the crowd. It'd be this sense... just like when their music would start, you'd literally be looking around for where are they coming, where are they going to appear from. There was lots of cool factor to it. The fact that they all came out in like SWAT team gear, like riot gear, that they looked cool. It looked like they were like a SWAT team, a hit team coming out, especially in that initial storyline where they would come out and take someone out when it wasn't like their match or anything. So I think there was a lot of ingredients that made them work. And when they eventually did split, the idea that Rollins, who obviously Ambrose had been more or less the mouthpiece for a lot of the early days of it, Roman Reigns was like the heavy who they were starting to get more steam behind with the idea that he's the cousin of The Rock, and they'd had him like do super well in the Royal Rumble and things like this by this point. Just the idea that suddenly Rollins was the first one to really get that big push and like turn heel and get the golden stamp with everything with Triple H and everything. I think they just, it worked really well to establish all of these guys.
Yeah, and I think one other thing, I can't remember which episode I mentioned it on, but a lot of fans now kind of almost know what's going to happen before it happens because there's so many reports and leaks and stuff coming out all the time. At the time, the Shield always seemed to have a bit of a shock factor to it. They came up from NXT and no one really knew who they were. No one expected Seth Rollins to be the one to turn and then get the gold stamp from Triple H. So, I think that's one of the things that was quite nice was the fact that everything they seemed to do always had a bit of a shock factor to it that no one saw coming, which I think obviously adds to the appeal of it.
Yeah, and also just mentioning on the idea that when they did have the reunion, Roman Reigns is a really interesting guy, just because when you look at the story of his career, he did super well in the Royal Rumble that Blue Tista came back and won, and everyone was so behind Roman Reigns to win and it not be Batista, just because they could see it was going to be Batista. They wanted, that was the year they wanted Daniel Bryan to win. And when it was obvious that Daniel Bryan wasn't in it, Roman Reigns had dominated throughout it. They were like, well, go on, Roman, get rid of Batista. What WWE didn't realise is that they more just didn't want Batista to win rather than want Roman Reigns to win at that stage. Yeah. Now, I'm trying to remember if it was that same year that Roman was off or injured for a while in the summer. But when they came back, they pushed him like incredibly to the point that he then did win the Royal Rumble the next year, which wasn't what people wanted. And he kind of...
anyone who's been the runner-up more times in the Royal Rumble than Roman Reigns.
It's Big Show, surely.
Cheered for winning the Rumble, you have him eliminate Roman Reigns at the end.
Wait. So, how many times has he been runner-up? Because I would have thought that was the Big Show that's been runner-up.
Runner-up, I don't know. Well, he's runner-up with Batista, like you just said. Yeah, but then he got knocked out by Randy Orton, then Nakamura, then this year McIntyre. So that's 4 at least.
Wow, that's incredible. Hadn't paid attention to that. Big Show's been at least 2 or 3 times.
Oh yeah, Big Show's been there a few times. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure Roman's been there.
Who sort of the third person from the end who gets eliminated tends to be someone that the crowd are really backing. So like in the latest one, Edge had come back, made it to the final 3. Roman Reigns is the one to take the fall basically and throw them out of the ring, and then he ends up losing in the end to get another top.
Yeah.
Good formula they got going there. You can milk that for all they can.
Yeah. But okay, so I was going to say, so they then pushed Roman. Roman ended up in the John Cena spot of "We Hate You" from the audience, which he never got past until the real life thing of that he's got leukemia and he had to step away, I think, as world champion or universal champion. And when he came back, they brought him back, and it's like, well, we're doing a Shield reunion, and so then people liked Roman again. So the Shield, in a sense, even though they weren't going to turn on Roman straight away coming back from leukemia, but they, within time, they've kind of reverted back to being like fed up of him. But the Shield, they liked him in the Shield. They like seeing the big power bomb.
Yeah, definitely. The big sort of grunt beforehand as well. Everyone loves making that noise.
Yeah. Okay, so
Which you managed to get into Hobbs and Shaw, if you've seen that.
Yeah, I have. Interesting thing, I may have already mentioned this before, but I'll tell this story. Just because Hobbs and Shaw is the film with The Rock in, and obviously then Roman Reigns was in it whilst he was off with leukemia. I saw that in France last year, and I didn't know what time the metro line closed, like the underground, the subway. And I had to run out of the film halfway through. And I then went back to see it almost a week later, still in France. So I saw that 1.5 times in France, that film. That's my story on that. Anyway, Dave, do you want to introduce the idea of a faction?
Yeah, we're going to go back. I think this one's going to be one of the ones we're bound to talk about, because it's not only just a great faction, but a faction that has spawned and motivated and inspired many other factions. The Four Horsemen.
Thought it would be. Yeah. The Four Horsemen. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your history?
I'll try and tell you a little bit about, but it's such a vast and storied history that that's weird. Okay, so Four Horsemen, 1985 original Horsemen were Ric Flair, Ole and Arn Anderson, and Tully Blanchard, with J.J. Dillon as their manager, and they're sort of like this. Formed in 85. It's a big sort of feud they're having with people like Dusty Rhodes and Magnum TA and Rock and Roll Express and people like that, the Road Warriors, all these other great characters and great faces they had in the NWA old days. That having this super group of villains coming together, just being the sort of the gold standard of wrestlers at the time, and everything sort of this super group of these guys, as I say, and that they've got obviously their existence pretty much inspired the creation of the War Games match, which we talked about a few weeks ago. Things like they're doing things like big things at the time, like on TV, like breaking up like Dusty Rhodes' leg, so that they could put him out for a while, and his comeback story and stuff like that. So, and the fact that they've obviously established the stable of the Four Horsemen, but then sort of made it interchangeable. So you then had guys coming out of there and going out. So Ole Anderson, for instance, is out, so they have to replace him someone. So they get Lex Luger. In to replace Ole Anderson. Then Luger's replaced by Barry Windham. They kick Luger out, Windham takes his place, and you've got people. Who else has been in it? There's so many people who have been in the Horsemen. Sid Vicious took over from Windham at one point. And you got later in the 90s when they sort of this is all the Horsemen heyday is like the 80s. But then they brought them back in the 90s when Ric Flair came back to WCW, and they brought him back with Arn Anderson, and they had then teaming up with I think they had, who do they have else in the thing? They haven't listed out the stuff. So they had Sting for a little while in the late 80s. Sting came in for a little while. He was part of the Horsemen. Then Sid Vicious would be part of the Horsemen, as I said. Then later in the 90s, they bring back, and they have Flair coming back, joins Arn Anderson, and they have a big Horseman reunion, and out comes Paul Roma. Yeah, quite necessarily the best, the quite high ending of that one. But then you have Brian Pillman joining the Horsemen for a little while as well. So you have really great people. You have Chris Benoit's part of the Horsemen, Dean Malenko, and possibly the greatest Horseman of all time,
Steve Mongo McMichael. I knew it.
Jeff Jarrett may have been for a very brief time as well. So they have a lot of different lineups, and also just if you are watching or listening, if you're not following this Twitter account, you've got to, which is a new Twitter account that came out at the start of this last week, called "What Will Mongo Do Next?"
Yeah.
just clips of Steve Mongo McMichael matches where you just don't know what's going to happen. Whether or not he's going to take a move in a weird way, he's just going to do like a jumping bump for a William Regal uppercut, or he's just going to suddenly try and hit someone with a briefcase and just throw it at them while they're sort of mid-flight, or he's just going to do something really, really weird.
Now, Mongo, just to say a little bit about Mongo, not necessarily to slam him, not necessarily to defend him. Now, the interesting thing with him is the first time wrestling fans saw Steve Mongo McMichael was in and surrounding the main event of WrestleMania 11, I believe, which was Bam Bam Bigelow versus LT Lawrence Taylor. And Lawrence Taylor was this NFL star, and he came out with his fellow NFL stars, one of which was Steve Mongo McMichael. And that would have been 1995, and then within a year, he was one of the commentators on WCW Monday Nitro, which somehow, with his dog, which somehow transitioned into him being in the Four Horsemen. So
hadn't wrestled very long. He was straight in there. 1997, I'm pretty sure he joined that.
I think he was a US champion as well.
Yeah, there's one of the clips in the Mongo thing is his victory on that one, which is quite hilarious. I don't know the exact history of all the stuff, but it's the fact that the Horsemen are just, I say the Horsemen, the reason they are the main stable is that they are the stable that sort of started all these sort of different sort of stables and factions and stuff like that, and the idea you could put all these people together for a common cause, to say their whole thing was strength in numbers. Anyone's in a title match and they're in a bit of trouble, they go, everyone just plow in there and save the day and what have you for their guy.
Yeah. So here's the thing: were the Horsemen the original faction? What factions existed before them?
I wouldn't be able to tell you.
No, I'm not sure that there was one that predates it, or that there might. Well, I suppose in that sense you get something like the Von Erichs or the Harts, who were like family, and so in that sense you could say that they're a faction. But these were just the coming together of like the guys to dominate like not just one division but all of the divisions all at once. Sam, what's your knowledge of the Four Horsemen? Is it just of legend or?
Yeah, literally just of legend. Obviously, the people who were in it kind of keep popping up every now and again. Everyone knows about Ric Flair and obviously being the 16-time world champion. Obviously the father of Charlotte Flair as well. I know of Tully Blanchard from his time more recently in AEW as the manager of Shawn Spears. Same as Arn Anderson. The first time that I saw a match of Arn Anderson was actually when we did the watch along on this podcast. So I didn't know a lot about him either. I've just sort of seen him more recently.
Owe it to yourself, Sam, to watch some of the Brainbusters, Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard as a tag team. They are just one of the best ever.
Okay, brilliant. I'll have to look some of that up. But other than that, I know that in more recent times, there's been the two Four Horsewomen sort of. They haven't really ever been factions because I don't really think they've ever come together as a team very often. But you've got obviously like Charlotte, Becky, Bayley, and Sasha Banks as one. And then you've got the MMA Four Horsewomen of Shayna Baszler, Ronda Rousey, Jessamine Duke and Marina Shafir. So I know that obviously they're kind of a spin-off almost of the original Four Horsemen, but that's about as far as my knowledge goes.
Yeah. Okay, here's an interesting thing from Wikipedia where it's got a timeline of the Four Horsemen, and it shows how long each member was a member. Now, obviously, Flair was the only one who was always there. Now, Arn Anderson, it's got an incredibly tiny gap in about 1997. I don't know what that represents, other than the fact that maybe it was when he was have to retire or something, and so they put a gap there. I don't know. But
that
then
when Flair was in WWF, I assume.
No. This is about 97.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. After this, when you look to see who are the longest running members, obviously J.J. Dillon, but obviously he's not a wrestler. The next on the list is Chris Benoit. Now, I think my favourite version of the Four Horsemen that I saw, and it was probably just because I saw the older versions, late 80s, early 90s, when I was incredibly young, or seeing on like videotape. But the one that what I remember the most was during the time where it was Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Chris Benoit, and then from Steve Mongo McMichael, who back in the day I just accepted it's Mongo, and then Dean Malenko. And what a 4-man team that is when you think of earlier versions of it. Yeah, obviously Tully Blanchard and Ollie Anderson. But then if you've got people like Sid in it, or Paul Roma in about 92, let's just see when it was. I can't spot him. 93, right? But when you get a team where it's Ric Flair, one of the greatest in-ring wrestlers of all time, Arn Anderson, who never fairly included in that conversation as much as he should be, but another incredibly good in-ring wrestler. And then you add on to it Chris Benoit, arguably one of the greatest, well, in the conversation, the greatest in-ring wrestler, in-ring technical wrestler, and Dean Malenko, the man of 1,000 holds. I think that was probably, to me, the most unstoppable version of that team, where any of them could have been world champion. Only 2 of them ever were a world champion. Obviously, Anderson, I think, may have only ever had a world title shot once, which may have been against Ric Flair. I'm trying to remember what the storyline was there. And then Malenko never competed because he was a smaller guy. But Benoit was a world champion, Flair world champion. But all of them, in-ring ability-wise, could have been world champions.
Yeah, it was also like I'd say with Anderson, it's quite a special sort of thing anyway, because with Flair and Anderson obviously were the mainstays of that faction all the way through. When Anderson had to retire, there was a very specific point where they brought Kurt Hennigan to be in the Horsemen, and there was a very special point where Anderson specifically said, "We're not just giving you a spot in the Horsemen; you're getting my spot."
Yes,
and it was a real special thing, and it made the sort of like the turn when Hennig turned on them in the War Games match. Like it was more sort of like a more sort of like really a real point to it was that they gave him Anderson's spot and he turns on them. It's real sad point to that whole thing, and like made the turn really really good in my opinion. But
yeah, so we can come back because obviously there's so much more we can talk about the Four Horsemen. But in one sense, there is a couple of things where it's obviously the Horsewomen, as you've mentioned, Sam. But there's kind of no pun intended, because it will leech onto this later. There is a legacy of the Four Horsemen where it has got after effects, which, because obviously WCW folded, WWF bought them. WWF never did a version of the Four Horsemen themselves. They never capitalised on that, which to me is absolutely insane. But we would get first Evolution, which was led by Triple H, with Ric Flair as a member, of which there were 4. And then later on with Randy Orton leading Legacy, which you can say all in one way or another, you could see somewhat as spin-offs, continuation of the vibe of the Four Horsemen. So, and then of course in TNA you had Fortune, where they had to first they were like, we're doing this hand signal, but then they were like, oh, we may have to change it somehow. I don't know.
No, it was.
But yeah, let's talk about Evolution next. So that'll be the one I raise, just because of it feels like a natural flow. So Evolution was led by Triple H, as I just mentioned, with Ric Flair, who wasn't... See, the thing is, Flair wasn't a manager, but it was like, when you see the group of guys they've put together, and you'd got like the past being Ric Flair, the present being Triple H, and then the future being Randy Orton and Batista. And I can't remember if they tried to put a spin that Orton perhaps was more of the future, because obviously he was the 3rd generation wrestler, and then Batista was just the heavy. But obviously Batista would go on to be as much of a main eventer as Orton during their time there together. But yeah, what a faction!
Yeah, definitely. That's another one that's on my list actually. So yeah, I remember them. They were kind of like one of the earliest factions I can remember from watching as a kid. And just the fact that I knew Triple H already from some of the other stuff he'd done before, and so I was kind of interested because of that. And then obviously you have Batista and Randy Orton, you have the angle that Randy Orton actually becomes the youngest ever world heavyweight champion, and then the rest of Evolution turn on him. You kind of got that side of it as well, which was always quite interesting to watch. Essentially, I think from what I've read, Evolution sort of saved Batista's career as well, because obviously he came in as Devon Dudley's deacon, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, Deacon Batista.
That's the one. Yeah. And so then,
well, so it did save, like, that was his next thing he did on TV. And the couple of interesting things there is, like, the speculation, what's at least the story goes, the thing that actually saved Batista's career is that he would work out with Triple H. And so Triple H took him. But originally, and there may have actually been vignettes recorded, where I think it was going to be Sean O'Hare.
Mark Jindrak.
They were a tag team in WCW. Mark Jindrak was going to be the fourth man in Evolution. And it didn't go right. They last minute.
There's footage of it, and there's footage of the original vignettes on the that recent series that Network had about the ruthless aggression. There's parts of that. They were talking about that. Yeah, so it's the Mark Jindrak story of him being the almost man in Evolution. And they just said it doesn't work with him there.
He was the what was the guy in the Beatles that was like in the Beatles for like 3 songs? Something Best. I can't remember his name.
Pete Best.
Pete Best. He's the Pete Best of Evolution. But yeah, so, and then obviously, whereas we spoke about the Shield, all 3 of them went on to be world champions. Ric Flair obviously was 16, 18-time world champion, depending what record books you count. Triple H was the world champion at the time, and often world champion across that time period. But then, like you say, Randy Orton defeated Chris Benoit, become the youngest ever world heavyweight champion. The interesting thing there is that they clearly did it just to erase that Brock Lesnar was the youngest world champion at the time, and so that kind of put Orton in a great position to get that honour, because if he'd been a year older, they probably wouldn't have put the belt on him. And then, of course, Batista, and like Orton, how many times world champion is he? 13, 15?
14, I think.
14-time world champion, and then Batista is about a 4 or 6-time world champion as well.
Yeah, I mean, all of them world champions, all of them sort of people know today as well.
Yeah. One of in terms of individual career, perhaps like their individual careers, and just the fact that for Orton and Batista to really, that's where they first made like a big splash. That's where they really got elevated from. When we spoke earlier about the fact that a stable can elevate someone, I think Evolution is one of the best examples of that, because all four members are some of the most decorated world champions of all time. And when you consider that Batista, who again I forget how many times he's been world champion, 4, 6, something like that. If he's the least successful wrestler in the stable, and he's been like a 4 or 6-time world champion, but then gone on to have a very successful Hollywood career, probably second only to The Rock in terms of wrestlers, then the success level they've had is almost unrivaled.
There's no doubt about the success of the stable, and about all the champions, and the fact they did exactly what they're meant to do in elevating Orton and Batista. But there is something that still sticks in my craw a little bit with Evolution. It's sort of like, if you look at the actual timeline of them, it start off as the quartet thing, and the whole prelude, the very good promo where Triple H says, so if you wake up one morning, you're like laying in a pile of rubble or whatever he says. It just says Evolution just passed you by, which I always thought was a good little tagline. Yeah. But they never really got to use that again, because as soon as they started that thing, Orton and Batista both got injured, and were out for quite a while. So Evolution was pretty much for a little while the duo of Triple H and Flair, and that was like the sort of reign of terror sort of era, which was like from 2002 to 2003, which was Triple H being the champion and just being the constant dominant champion, which I think I mentioned before about Triple H, that he wasn't in the frame of mind to put anyone over, and it wasn't. He was sort of like making sure that he was always the one that was winning, and really like not giving people like Rob Van Dam and Ray Dudley and people like that, and sort of like people he was in like little feuds with, and never really giving them a huge amount. And we talked about the Booker T feud, which was a fiasco, and all that sort of stuff. And so once Orton and Batista got back at last, and then they sort of carried on from where they left off, it got a lot better. But it was at the expense of a lot of guys who could have had a bit of a rub from trips. And as I say, I think the Orton reign and the sudden turn was something that could have been built up a little bit longer, in my opinion. It came too quickly for me. In terms of that, and I think it was a case of that was just another case of Triple H saying, "No, I should be the champion. He should be chasing me," which essentially, the idea of the good guy chasing the bad guy champion is always the one that sells better, probably looks better from a story perspective for the fans. But it just all sort of happened so rapidly, that sort of turn and the title change, and then Triple H being on top again, and it was just it was a good stable in many respects, but at the same time, it was also during that really iffy time in Triple H's career when he was in total control.
Yeah, and obviously they did have a reunion, which perhaps didn't go too well, to put it mildly. Which is interesting because it plays into what we said earlier about Roman Reigns and the Shield, where Batista came back and he won the Royal Rumble, and he was definitely a face. The plan was that he was going to come back and I believe face Randy Orton for the world title, and they'd do this thing where he'd play off everything with Evolution and their past history. And the audience, they just didn't want Batista to come back. Now, Batista has said, and I believe him, he wanted to come back and be a heel. But they said, no, you're going to come back and be the good guy face. You're going to come back and be the face, and you're going to win the Royal Rumble and take on Orton. But people didn't want someone just to come back for WrestleMania. They didn't want someone just to come back in their first match and win the Royal Rumble. They wanted Daniel Bryan, who had worked for it. And so by the time we got to WrestleMania, Orton and Batista, even though they were competing, they were somewhat on the same page. And within a month or two, we ended up with the full-on reunion of Evolution. Yes. We ended up with a full-on reunion of Evolution where they ended up taking on the Shield, and it
losing a lot.
But it ended with the infamous Blue-tista moment, which is something which still irks Batista to this day. But I can understand why. I'm wearing blue, Sam, you're wearing blue. It's just like if you were to wear more blue than just like a shirt, then you'd finish your career surely.
It's a bit of a strange one. But fans will latch on to. But I think that's
I know. They start chanting
the times, isn't it?
Blue-tista because he's wearing blue. The others were all in black, and he's wearing blue. And they latched onto it.
It's like he didn't understand why it was. It was like, come on, did you not think about this before you went out there?
Yeah, but you know what? It was only like 3 guys. It wasn't like there was like I've got NWO behind me where there was like 60 guys all wearing black and white, and then there's just one guy in bright blue. There was just 3 of them, 2 wearing black, 1 wearing blue.
It's a little bit like when we'll probably talk about them later, where DX when they sort of like had their sort of like their sort of mid late 90s sort of thing when X-Pac was part of them. X-Pac kept wearing bright black and red, didn't he, for his matches? It was like everyone was in green and black, and he was always in black and red for a little while. It was like the initial start. I can't remember that off the top
of my head. But yeah, and so then the last, and this will probably be the end of anything Evolution related, unless it's just something out of Hall of Fame, because obviously, like we've mentioned before, Batista's supposed to be in the 2020 Hall of Fame, but it's who knows if and when that will ever happen. But in 2018, leading up to Batista's final match with Triple H at WrestleMania 2019, is we had a SmackDown show where there was like a Evolution reunion, And that was great because they all came out, and I think Orton at the time may have been heel, or something like this. Orton may have been a heel, but they all came out together, and Flair was there, and Triple H was there, and they all put each other over. And the great thing with it, because obviously when you get a faction and they've all kind of feuded with each other, it's weird to think that they would ever have any kind of a reunion. Randy Orton, how can you get over the fact that you've just become the youngest world champion ever, and within a day of becoming it, all of your teammates suddenly do the famous thumbs up, thumbs down thing and turn on you? Like, what kind of bastards were they? So why would you ever think, well, okay, we can be friends again later on, even if it's 15 years later? You know, how could you do that? So you've got all these guys in the ring that they can be friends, they can't be friends, or whatever. And then you've got Batista's like, Randy Orton, you've gone on to do so well, and Ric Flair, the greatest of all time, woo, and Triple H, you've done it all, you've beaten everyone except me. And Triple H played it perfectly, just with the smile on his face, turning into the, are we going to have a fight here? Are we going to have a fight? They have the face-to-face thing, and that's all they actually needed to set up their match the next year. Now, when it actually came to it, they kind of botched it because they had Batista return, beating up Ric Flair in a backstage segment, which is they wasted Batista's return to have him backstage to beat up Ric Flair, left Ric Flair blooded when it was Ric Flair's birthday or something like this. And then Batista came out and says, like, so obviously relating back to this thing on SmackDown 8 months ago, I clearly want a match with you. And Batista forgot all of his lines and gave the famous, just give me what I want. And Triple H is like, do you know what you want? What do you want? And Batista's just like, give me what I want. Over and over again.
Spitting a waterfall onto the microphone as well at the same time.
It's amazing. I saw like a meme video someone made where it was the Spice Girls interspliced with Batista. Give me what you want, what you really, really want. Just give me what I want, what you really, really want. I wanna. It was brilliant. I can't do it justice. Anyway, Sam, do you have another faction?
Yes, I do. I'm going to move on now to the Wyatt family.
Ooh, good choice.
One of the darker teams over the years, so one of the darker factions, definitely a lot darker than what we've discussed so far.
Yeah.
Obviously led by Bray Wyatt, and I think Bray Wyatt is a character that sort of saved the man's career because he was he came in originally as Husky Harris, didn't he? Where he was just this.
He did.
Big guy with not a lot of direction or character or anything like that, and then he came back as Bray Wyatt. Had his brothers, his family behind him in Luke Harper and Eric Rowan, and then obviously they brought in Braun Strowman as well. And I think this is one of those times when, like we were saying earlier, where a team actually elevates people. I think realistically, particularly with Harper and Rowan, they were never really anything else other than members of the Wyatt family. Neither of them ever went on to do their own thing. They tried a little bit with Luke Harper. He had the Intercontinental Championship for a little bit.
Yeah.
But then every time that happened, they would always bring them back together as a team at some point, up until Eric Rowan's most recent time where he was with Daniel Bryan, and then he was with a Spider. But they would always end up bringing them back, whether it be as a part of the Wyatt family, whether it be as the Bludgeon Brothers. Together, they always seemed to be better than when they were alone. And so that was part of the brilliance of the Wyatt family. And with Braun Strowman, he was absolutely no one at the point. I think he'd done a few untelevised matches on NXT. They brought him in against, or in the feud with Roman Reigns, which brought Dean Ambrose into it as well. But he was this unstoppable monster and is obviously now Universal Champion. Yeah.
The Wyatt family are really interesting because even though they've had long periods, it's been like a long time since they were really a thing. There's always been, like you say, that connection. Like visually, the connection, just because it's such a distinct hillbilly. Do either of you guys know the film The Wrong Turn? No, it's a horror film with Eliza Dushku in, who was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But she's just up against these mountain men. They're like mountain men who are like killing her friends off, and she's trying to escape. And they always just reminded me, the Wyatt family reminded me of these mountain men. Not that they look exactly the same, but it's just sort of this yokel hillbilly cult thing that they've got going on. And one, I felt like at times they were really good. The thing which, first of all, I will say, Bray Wyatt's promos, I didn't really think I ever understood any of them. It always felt like they were on some level where I couldn't understand. Like getting the audience to sing "The whole world has your, I got the whole world in your hands." Right, that was a great idea. That there was some sort of cult thing going on there. Interesting is another film reference. I'm sure they got the idea of that from the movie Con Air, where there's the really creepy character played by Steve Buscemi who sings "The whole world in his hands" in that. I'm sure that's where they got that from. Someone may or may not be able to confirm that. But his promos where he'd go on about stuff, it's like it was like philosophy and all this highbrow stuff. I literally never understood any of it. If they could have made it make sense, where if he could have, a little bit like this Firefly Funhouse thing, if he was really diving into the minds of his opponent and bringing up examples from their past and references and stuff like this of things that had happened, that would have been really good. But I literally never understood a single Bray Wyatt promo.
Yeah, I always found his cryptic promos very difficult to understand as well. I always just assumed it was because I was a bit too young to understand them, but maybe now it's coming to light that it wasn't quite.
Well, I don't know. Dave, did you ever understand what he was on about?
Not entirely, but I think that was kind of the point with him. You never sort of, it was sort of like the unhinged thing of you never know quite what his motivation fully is, but you're still listening. It's that Jake Roberts quality of like, where I was saying the other week about when we were talking about our favourite wrestlers, and the reason I like Jake Roberts so much was that he was the quiet guy and like talking all the time and talking at you and like right into your like eyes and your soul and everything. And Bray Wyatt's definitely been to like the school of Jake Roberts promos in that respect, because certainly in like the early days of the character with NXT and whatnot, he was it was a lot more sort of very calculated and delivered so like I say, it's a lot of stuff. I mean, he sort of had a thing on Twitter last year, I think, where he said that in a bunch of promos he had, like the early days of NXT and things like that, he threw in a few extra lines in there. It didn't necessarily make sense in the context of that particular speech, but together they end up making this other like structure, and put it out as like a little competition, sort of like say can you guess what they were, and sort of like I think someone eventually got it. And like it was this whole little speech where he like threw in lines from this big other speech into these other speeches that had been broadcast. So this whole thing where they didn't make sense in the context of speech, but in this wider thing, apparently it did. Obviously, that never came to anything because you had to like explain it on Twitter. But it's just that sort of like that thought that goes into it, and the sort of like I guess the trust they had with him having that character and then going on to it. But as far as like the whole clan goes, the whole Wyatt family, I mean, I liked how they originally had started introducing them. You know, when Wyatt was on NXT and he sort of had a bit of a layoff through injury, but he came back, and then he came out to have a match or something like that, and then suddenly was like, oh no, I'm never alone. And then that's the debut of Luke Harper. He comes out, and a few weeks later he does the same sort of thing, but then it's Eric Rowan comes out. And he wrestles the match for Wyatt, and suddenly he's got these two giant guys with him, and suddenly the Wyatt family's formed, which I always liked as a sort of introduction to them. I think that with their main roster stuff, when they sort of debuted there with like the Fire match, the Inferno match with Kane, and all that other stuff they've done there, and the feud with Undertaker and Kane, where he's got possession of their powers and all that sort of stuff, never really thought that made sense in terms of what the character originally sort of was. I didn't understand why. It was never explained how has Bray Wyatt suddenly got their powers, and all this other stuff, this sort of supernatural stuff that I think they went a little bit too overboard with on their main roster run.
Yeah, but, I think my favourite Bray Wyatt power was one time when they cut to an overhead camera shot and there were just like worms all over his opponent, like as a projection.
Was that the Orton match at WrestleMania?
Yeah, it was. That's it. Yeah,
see, it was fun. But I was watching with my friend Neil, and I think on the second or third one, he did point out to me, he's like, what's that going to do to his opponent? His opponent's in the ring and can't see this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's a very good point. It's just there to creep the crowd out. And on the third one, he just ends up getting hit with an RKO and loses. And it was just like, oh, what was the point? It didn't do anything for him. He lost.
Yeah.
So that's unfortunately the flaws of the character, I guess. But in terms of the stable, I think that's a good shout for certainly in the more recent guys. And of course, they had those really good matches with the Shield as well, where it's just like these great factions going to war with each other. And the way that sort of went with that, there was a bit of I don't know if you guys remember the sort of time when the Wyatt family briefly turned face and sort of joined Roman Reigns against these other guys, and then I think Wyatt got injured again or something like that, and they had to take a quick laugh. It was on one of the post-Manias. It's Roman Reigns and Bray Wyatt against, I think, Sheamus and Del Rio or something.
Wow.
And there's that really cool bit where Wyatt's hit one of them with his finish, and as he's covering him, he sort of just points at the other guy, and Roman just literally jumps over them and spears him. And it's really a cool little moment. Is that really good? But anyway.
So obviously, within the Wyatt family, there's Braun Strowman, who, as you say, Sam, is now Universal Champion. He was hardly part of the Wyatt family, so he was brought in with the Wyatt family, but his the Black Sheep, which was again a great idea, obviously following Eric Rowan mostly coming out in the White Sheep mask, so the Black Sheep of the Wyatt family. That was I think a matter of months at best before he was no longer part of it. But that history is still great, where they can play back into that as they have with the recent feud, because when you create this history and you've got this connective tissue that you can refer back to, it does work. But the big one, which I feel like most people are disappointed in over the years, is Sister Abigail, which never came to anything. When we eventually did get a Sister Abigail, which was even rumoured a few months ago, I forget who it was going to be. Who was it rumoured to be that was going to be Sister Abigail?
I don't know.
Oh, damn it, I can't remember. It'll come back to me.
I know there was one where they were thinking about bringing Nikki Cross up as Sister Abigail quite a few years ago.
Well, maybe that's... there was someone they were saying about was going to be Sister Abigail's part of the Firefly Funhouse stuff a few months ago, but it never happened. But eventually, when we did get Sister Abigail, it was a split personality of Bray Wyatt, which, with the beard, with the look, it wasn't like Psycho and Norman Bates. It just didn't work with him. It should have been someone. And in a sense, they could still eventually bring it to being someone. It's just one of the biggest missed opportunities to introduce the idea of this person that's never tangible into making them someone tangible.
Well, thank God they didn't go through with it, though, because obviously Bray got injured, didn't he? So they didn't. He was going to go into that little match with Finn Balor, who was going to be apparently the Pumpkin Demon King. He said that weird little orange face paint thing crossover. We did a crossover with him as well, didn't they? That was such a weird.
But I think there is one more member of the Wyatt family that no one's mentioned.
Daniel Bryan.
There you go.
He
had the beard for it. It's amazing
Daniel Wyatt.
Sorry? Yeah.
Daniel Wyatt.
It's amazing how so many of the storylines that we've spoken about actually cross over, because this, again, was just before Bryan went on to fight Batista and Randy Orton in that WrestleMania main event where they didn't want Roman... Reigns, where Batista won, where they wanted Roman to win and everything else. Daniel Bryan was forced into joining the Wyatt family, and everyone rebelled against it to the point where they had to listen to them.
Which, in a way, I really enjoyed the story of Daniel Bryan actually sort of infiltrating from within. I always thought that was quite a good storyline from my perspective.
They sort of did it again with Randy Orton, didn't they? With him sort of being a part of the family, so he could burn down the Sister Abigail's house.
Oh yeah, Jesus, I'd forgotten that.
That was the reason they had the match in the Mania in the end.
Yeah.
So he won the wrong part of the family, hadn't he? He was tag champions with Wyatt, and and then he burnt the house down.
Yeah. Okay. So, Bray Wyatt often has things burned down and then they come back. But regardless, Dave, who would you like to bring up as the next faction as point of discussion?
Okay, well, we sort of another one we sort of can take the splinters off from the Four Horsemen. I briefly mentioned them, but I generally do like
Fortune, yeah.
From TNA.
Wow.
So let me just bring up Fortune's little Wikipedia thing here. So yeah, so this was sort of a splinter group, as I say, from the fact that that Ric Flair, when he came to TNA in 2010, or before 2009 rather. No, 2010. Sorry, beginning of 2010, he was then like managing AJ Styles, and they're doing the whole sort of AJ being Nature Boy Jr. coming out in the weird little robe with the hoodie bit. I quite liked actually, but so later in that year, as Styles was champion, but they lost the title and they started he was on a bit of a losing streak, and they did a bunch of stuff. Then Flair starts being the sort of like the manager or coach of Frankie Kazarian. He's part of in TNA as well. So around about May, June time, Flair decides that he's going to reform the Horsemen. Obviously not actually be the Horsemen because they don't have the rights to the name. And he's going to have AJ be the Flair of the Horsemen. He's going to have Kazarian be the Barry Windham. He's going to have Bobby Roode and James Storm be part of it. Beer Money going to be the Arn and Tully, and it's going to have Desmond Wolfe.
Yeah.
As the Lex Luger style thing, Desmond Wolfe, aka Nigel McGuinness. But then they have to. But he wants to make sure they're all winners. So he has them in a series of matches, and AJ and Kazarian win their matches. They win a tag match, and AJ wins the TV title and things like that. Desmond Wolfe doesn't win his matches, so he's never officially part of the group, which is unfortunate. But so they start off with Flair leading, Styles, Kazarian, and Beer Money, which is as far as talents go, that's a pretty good group. All four very, very good talents, and they are officially known as Fortune. And then they add Doug Williams to the mix. They had Matt Morgan for a little bit. They had this feud with the ECW sort of originals.
Of course, what were they called?
Sort of like
EV... What were the Extreme originals? What was their faction called?
EV2 they were called. EV 2.0.
Yeah.
Extreme version 2.0, because again they did that weird little ECW reunion thing, which they couldn't use any of the ECW names because they couldn't use any of them. They didn't own the names, the titles. But they go through this feud with EV2. It's not great, but eventually they have this. They kick out Matt Morgan, they kick out Doug Williams, and it's sort of back to the original four again. And they end up being part of. Unfortunately, one of my least favourite stables of all time, Immortal.
Yeah.
Of the 10-10-10 Bound for Glory, where they said it's Hogan and Bischoff and Flair's brought Fortune as part of it, and eventually a little while into the group, there's a series of tapings that Flair's not part of because he's injured, and they end up sort of almost conquering from within. So Fortune's they're having this thing where they don't know someone's going to attack them. They don't know who it's going to be, and they're all of them and Fortune are in the ring, and suddenly all four of all of Fortune sort of do the symbol out there and just attack from behind. So they're sort of like they're in there already and they're attacking. It's quite a good little moment where they turn face. So they have like the Fortune versus Immortal sort of feud, and that sort of they end up sort of surviving through all that. AJ gets injured at some point, and they bring in Chris Daniels. Chris Daniels comes in to sort of like avenge AJ Styles for a little while. So for a little while, their face reunion, they're back to sort of like five members again: AJ Styles, Daniels, Beer Money, and Kazarian. And again, that's five really top talents all in case together. And this is over a case of a couple of years. They did actually last a little longer than people remember, and it sort of all comes to a head when they all sort of end up having to go against each other in this sort of this Bound for Glory series tournament, where the winner gets the title shot at Bound for Glory, which Bobby Roode won in the end. And in that time, Daniels has turned on AJ to continue their.
Sorry, was that when Bobby Roode? Was that when he first won the world title?
He won the tournament. He didn't beat Angle.
Yeah.
But he didn't beat Angle. James Storm beat Angle a couple of days later.
That's right.
And then that sort of ended up with that one. So as soon as they sort of like feuded, that was like the end of the faction pretty much. And then Daniels, Kazarian, and AJ went on to like their little three-way feud, which ended up with Daniels and Kazarian being a team for like ever. But I think as far as that from a sort of Four Horsemen rip-off, but then sort of going for the next 2-3 years. I think they ended up lasting until like 2013. I think that time was. 2011. So yeah, 2 years exactly. So started 2010.
Yeah.
Onto 2011 is sort of like the starting point of that group, and I think they're actually a little bit underrated in terms of their sort of standing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree when you say about their history there. I think though the problem is whenever you get a group which models itself on, like, now obviously it's got Ric Flair as part of it, and you know that's the originator of the Four Horsemen, but it's a Four Horsemen clone in TNA. And TNA did an awful lot of clones and something alikes and stuff like that. So they never really had too much of a chance for it to really have its own standing, its own legacy, as it were. Like when people say, even speak about Evolution doesn't really have the same legacy as the Four Horsemen, and when we just mentioned
legacy,
well, when you think about legacy is like an afterthought. Like I think you have to think of, I'm thinking about the Four Horsemen, and so then you might end up mentioning Evolution, and from there you'll think of legacy. Or if you mention Evolution, you'll be like, well, that's because of the Four Horsemen. And then there was also Legacy. And then somewhere off to the side at the back there, you'll be like, oh, didn't TNA do a Four Horsemen, which they called Fortune? And it was good. And again, when you look at the people in it, it's unfortunate that Bobby Roode's career in WWE, at one point it had a lot of promise, and then it's been wishy-washy, and it's had times where it's been really down, and it's had a couple of moments, even within the last few months, where it looks like, oh, there might still be hope for him, but it's not really cemented. Again, the word legacy. It's not really cemented his legacy. I think AJ Styles is the shining gem, obviously, with the association there. But because he's done so much else around it, which I'm sure we'll touch upon soon enough as well, because there's a very significant faction that he was part of, that no one's really carrying the Fortune banner. No one's really saying, like, oh yeah, from Fortune, because Ric Flair, obviously, people don't look at him and say, you're the guy from Fortune. People will look at...
no, of course not,
yeah, exactly.
I'd never say that this is like a high, like, level stable, as it's obviously in terms of...
Yeah, like, but I think that's one of the things that affects where, like, a stable's legacy goes, because if you were to look at Big Dick Dudley, I'm wearing a Dudley Boys hat today. We haven't mentioned about them yet. But if you look at Big Dick Dudley, people, he never had a great career, but he was one of the Dudley Boys, and it was something of significance, so he can pin himself to that. If you look at Arn Anderson, even though he's got enough where he stands alone as Arn Anderson, he's most remembered as one of the Four Horsemen. It's this thing. I don't think a group like Fortune had anything really enough to say this is our own, or this is the mark we made on wrestling, for it to have that lasting impact. No pun intended. Okay, so I will bring up anything you want to say on Fortune, Sam. Did you see any of them?
No. All I know is obviously the names of the people within it, and I can obviously echo what's been said before, that they are a fairly unstoppable team just by names on paper.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
I will say to any AEW fans out there that are listening, if it wasn't for Fortune, then Kazarian and Daniels wouldn't have started teaming up on the reg, and that probably wouldn't have started the stable that is now known as SCU.
Yeah.
SCU!
As my final note, trying to claw some credibility back here, I'll let you guys carry on.
Okay, do you know what? Like, I am going to bring up the Dudley Boys.
Hey.
So, the Dudley Boys, obviously most famously, are Bubba Ray and Devon Dudley, but there have been so many other Dudleys. The next most famous one is definitely Little Spike Dudley, but there was also Big Dick Dudley, as I mentioned, Dances with Dudley, Sign Guy Dudley, Dudley. Any others that I've forgotten?
Luke and Butch Dudley, as I think I mentioned a few
couple of weeks ago.
Just shows you the link to.
So the thing with the Dudley Boys is they what's interesting about them is they kind of have their own legacy, because they've one of the, if not the, they may actually have the record for being the most decorated tag team champions of all time. And this is an example, as we was talking about at the top of the show, that this is, for the most part, the legacy of the Dudley Boys is two guys. They are a tag team, but they came from a faction, and at other times, you know, there's been elements of the faction which have been brought back. But for the most part, it is tag team. Now, everyone will look at the Dudley Boys and they'll associate them to ECW, but their time with ECW, even though it's what started them and launched them, is relatively small compared to everything that they did since. But from that ECW style, that left a big stamp on them of that they do the tables matches, the tables, ladders and chairs matches, the hardcore style wrestling. And they went to WWF in the either very, very late 90s or very early noughties. I can't remember quite the year that they jumped over. And they would have the very famous feud with Edge and Christian and the Hardy Boys, which would lead on to the TLC matches at WrestleMania, and whenever they did 2 or 3 of them at least, a very famous tables, ladders and chairs matches. They were incredibly successful tag team. The Dudley Boys is very interesting, as when you look at the history of WWF in the mid 90s to late 90s, tag team wrestling may have been reduced to 2 or 3 teams at a time. But by the time they hit this point where there was Edge and Christian and the Hardy Boys and the Dudley Boys as these 3 incredible teams, and then of course you'd have like the Acolytes and Too Cool and other tag teams around this time period, there was suddenly this thriving tag team division. But right at the top of it is you could have a main event of Raw, and it could be Steve Austin and The Rock versus the Dudley Boys, and the Dudley Boys had this badassedness to them, where you could take them kind of like a modern day Legion of Doom Road Warriors, where it'd be like, well, they may be a tag team, but these are 2 main event guys that any world champion contender could be in the ring with, and it's not that, you know, they're going to win. If you'd have Hulk Hogan in the ring against one of the Nasty Boys, Hulk Hogan's going to win. You'd know that. But if you'd have Stone Cold and The Rock in there with the Dudley Boys, it'd be like, well, the Dudley Boys, they're going to kick their ass, sort of thing, because they're actually a team. You know, they're going to be dominant here. There's just as big a threat as the others. But obviously, they've then gone on to be ECW World Tag Team Champions. They were WCW World Tag Team Champions in WWF. They were... No, it's got to count it. Got to count it.
Yeah,
it was within a year of the company folding, so, you know. They were the WWF World Tag Team Champions. I'm sure they probably were WWE World Tag Team Champions at some point was after the rebranding.
Yeah, that would have been
but it's the legacy of the belts are still the same. Then they went on to be TNA World Tag Team Champions. I'm not sure. Did they win the tag belts in Japan?
Yeah, IWGP Tag Team Champions as well, yeah.
So it's just like, there is not another team that can ever have these same things, because WCW's gone, ECW's gone. They are one of a kind in that no one else can touch upon this accomplishment. But, and then like Bubba Ray has been said to be retired for a little while, even though he still wrestles. And he's with Ring of Honor, but I think Devon is very much retired. I think, is Devon still associated to WWE?
Yeah, he's backstage producer, yeah.
So the chance of them winning, I don't think they ever won the Ring of Honor belts, but the chance of them winning the Ring of Honor belts seem like it's not going to happen now. It's unlikely with Bubba Ray being in Ring of Honor that they'll cross over to AEW, although Marty Scurll may make that possible. So it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that should Devon no longer be involved in WWE, that they could win the belts somewhere else. Anyway, I've spoken quite a while. Sam, tell us about the Dudleys.
Yeah, obviously I remember them from sort of around the time that they were going up against Edge Christian and the Hardy Boys in those ladder matches. I don't really remember the matches particularly well, but I've seen them since, and they're always, you know, very hardcore. And I remember Spike Dudley coming in. And then they also had Stacy Keibler as a manager for a while as well.
True.
Didn't they? So I remember a little bit about that. Also, Bubba Ray was, I think, TNA World Heavyweight Champion on his own as well at one point.
He was, as Bully Ray, as he's now known.
Yes. And obviously they came back into WWE, and it was the biggest nostalgia hit for years. The fact that they came back, because they've got those two major things that get the crowd going. They've got the Devon, get the tables. And they've obviously got the headbutt from the top rope where there's the
Wada!
But have you ever heard the story of why they started doing Devon, get the tables?
Tell me. I may have done, but remind me.
Well, it's fairly self-explanatory, to be honest.
Okay.
Devon Dudley basically missed the spot where he was supposed to go and get a couple of tables to put in the ring. So they were kind of at a little bit of a mismatch in the whatever they were doing. So Bubba Ray just literally looked at him and went, Devon, get the tables! And then he went out of the ring and got the tables.
That's amazing. That's great.
And from one little mistake like that, it's gone on forever, and people will always remember that as the Dudley Boys catchphrase. Yeah.
And do you know what the story, Sam, in particular, do you know why they say, "What's up"?
No, not at all.
Okay, Dave, do you know?
It's a parody of a Budweiser advert.
Yeah, Budweiser. So, you know, there's...
Still on.
Budweiser, they used to have, like, frogs that would go, Bud, why, Zer, as if they're, like, croaking, as if they're going, like, ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. One would be going, Bud, Bud, Bud. Another would go, wise, and then they'd end up going, like, Bud, wiser, Bud, wiser. And these were a series of adverts, and then they started doing where it'd be like, hey, what's up? And they'd be like, what's up? What's up?
That's 3 or 4 guys on the phone going,
yeah, they'd be going, what's up? And then, the Dudleys started doing it, and they just took it, and they probably made it more famous for their legacy.
And they did it way past the point where it was even remotely topical, but there we are.
Yeah. So
they brought that advert back recently. Have you seen it? The 90s seems to be back in at the moment, and that advert is on TV every now and again. I don't know if it's on regular television or if it's part of like the on-demand stuff. But
it's a weird thing with nostalgia, and nostalgia is such a huge thing in wrestling. Where that's why we'd bring back Hulk Hogan. That's why we'll bring back, Brock Lesnar. We'll bring back The Rock to have a match here and there. But it's like we're now into the era where like the 90s is like the nostalgia things, where we can still bring back Goldberg, for example. But yeah, so it's interesting that we've now reached the age where the 1990s is old enough to be nostalgia. But Dudley Boys. Anything else? Who are the other Dudleys that we've not really touched on? Little Spike Dudley.
I think there's just a bring out their TNA run again, just to the fact that obviously they're a Team 3D, the two of them. But they did for a little while have Brother Runt with them.
Yes, they did. So Spike was Brother Runt. Now I hated.
Other things to say about them, really. So they're more of the I think they're more of a faction when they're in ECW, because that was where all the extra Dudleys were suddenly coming in from and all that sort of stuff. So I just saw them mainly as a tag team with their little brother associate every now and then. So yeah, I didn't have them down on my list because I was thinking more of like stables of like multi-man stables. But yeah, no, I have nothing really to add to what you do. What you said about them, really.
Well, okay, so the interesting thing I can add on when they went to, and this is a really interesting story in terms of pro wrestling and stuff that's happened over the years. The Dudley Boys were in ECW as the Dudley Boys. They went to WWF as the Dudley Boys, and they believed that Paul Heyman had let them be the Dudley Boys, and now they're the Dudley Boys. When they were then leaving WWF because they wanted a pay rise or to keep the same money, whatever it was, and WWF wouldn't do it, they were like, right, okay, and they were out of things for a while, and they went to go to TNA, and they found that WWE say, well, no, we own ECW now, so we own the Dudley Boys, even though they had left ECW still as the Dudley Boys and debuted in WWF. They were like, because we bought where you came from, we now own it. And they wouldn't let them be the Dudley Boys, which is so mean-spirited. Like, WWF missed the opportunity, because if they'd done something with Spike, they could have potentially still kept Dudley Boys. They could have done something to have a new version or their own version of the Dudley Boys, which you always could have done. But the Dudleys, they did something interesting, which they never debuted with, but they copyrighted. And this is an interesting thing, which history repeating a little bit with the Revival recent times, where they were going to call themselves the Revolt, and then there's this other tag team says, no, we've already been called the Revolt, so you can't be called the Revolt. And so they made all this stuff where they were going to call the Revival were going to call themselves the Revolt, and then never actually used it. The Dudley Boys, before they became known as Team 3D, obviously named after their finishing move, 3D, Dudley Death Drop, called themselves the Deadly Boys. And they were Brother Devon, which is what Devon, when he was in, even though his name is Devon, for some reason in TNA they always called him Brother Devon. And to go along with Brother Ray, as he was known before he was called Bully Ray. So when they first turned up in TNA, it was Brother Ray, sounds like Bubba Ray, Brother Ray, and Brother Devon, Team 3D, but they were going to be Devon Deadly and Brother Ray Deadly. But they never used it anywhere, but they were going to be the Deadly Boys, or the Deadly Brothers, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, how about that?
I should get the Deadlies. I always thought Team 3D was a rubbish name.
Yeah, it was. But you know what? In a sense, though, I give them kudos for there is still a connection in the name Team 3D. So there is some logic to it. But you don't want to be Fortune, which are like the Four Horsemen, where it feels like it's just we're calling it something as close to what we can, the original thing. So, they were the Dudley Boys, now they're the Deadly Boys, and I liked when they evolved it from being Brother Ray to Bully Ray. They kept the Ray bit, and it's like Bully Ray, he's a bully. I liked how they evolved that. Anyway, Sam, who's your next point of conversation?
Well, yeah, this is definitely not one of the teams that I consider one of the best of all time, but definitely one to mention.
The Job Squad?
One to mention would be the Nexus.
Ooh.
Oh, you're looking at my list, Sam. I had them next as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, great stable.
Yeah, one of these ones. Again, this was kind of. I think they were the first season of NXT.
Yeah,
that's right.
When NXT was good.
That's a controversial point there. You're entitled to your wrong opinion.
And the wrong one.
Okay, just very quickly on that as the segue. I loved the concept of NXT when they first did it, where there was like the keg challenge, and there was like the promo challenge. And it was brilliant for sometimes the wrong reasons. I think it was Eli Cottonwood on the second season had to do a promo about, what was it about? He had to do a promo about mustaches.
A mustache.
So, yeah. Okay, so Sam, sorry, we'll let you get back to the Nexus in a second. So they would, like, Matt Stryker would be the host, and he'd say, okay, now you need to give. No, this was the first. I can't remember if it was the first or second season.
Yeah, Eli Cottonwood was the second series. Yeah,
second season.
Second series was rife with these sort of weird.
So okay, so it was like you need to do a promo. Oh, okay, so they did this on both seasons. So it was the example
essentially
that they
what we
gave...
do in Extreme Improv. You give us a subject, we've got to do a minute monologue about it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Where do you think I got it? No, I'm just joking. That's a coincidence. Right. Yeah. Okay, but Sam. So on the first series, they'd say you have to do a promo about this theme. And Wade Barrett, who'd go on to win, he'd be like, you have to discuss wind. And you're like, oh my God, he's going to discuss farting or whatever. And he's like, in his like accent, this British accent, his nasty British accent, it's like, I want to discuss the winds of change round here. And it was a really good promo. He took it really well. Whereas, like, Ryback was on it, had to discuss, like, bubble gum or chewing gum. And he's like, you get all kinds of chewing gum, you get bubble gum, you get strawberry, and like he got booed out the building. On the second season, there was this guy called Eli Cottonwood, and he had to discuss mustaches. And he was like, it's like, now I don't have a mustache, even though he did have a visible mustache. He's like, and none of these guys in the ring have got a mustache. And then there was like two other guys with mustaches. He's like, but you give me 4 or 5 days, and I'll have a nice, thick mustache. Right, so there's Eli Cottonwood. But the point was, it was hilarious. And that is why NXT should still be about Titus O'Neil falling over with a keg and Eli Cottonwood doing these kind of promos. And Daniel Bryan with the keg, where he was literally doing like a hop like a crab. He knew he couldn't do this. So he was like, I'm just going to do something. And there was a thing where he was like, you had to sell T-shirts to the audience. And Daniel Bryan, you could see how smart a man he is. He was just like, we don't want your money. These are all free today. And he was just giving away the T-shirts. So all the audience were on his side. Anyway, sorry, I'm going to stop my camera just so that I'm going to stop my microphone. I'll sit here. Sam, tell us about the Nexus.
Okay, fair enough. Well, sort of similar to what I said about the Shield, where they came in and it was a massive shock factor. And, you know, they came in. John Cena was one of the guys in the match that they kind of took over. I can't remember who he was against, but they came in, they tore the ring apart, they beat everybody up. Daniel Bryan got fired because he started choking Justin Roberts with a tie. And yeah, they went there. There was then, instead of a Survivor Series match, I'm pretty sure it was Team Cena versus Team Nexus, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, with Bret Hart.
Oh, SummerSlam, yeah, that's it. And yeah, you know, the fact that they went into that. John Cena was at one point a member of the Nexus because he lost in his little feud with Wade Barrett to begin with. And then there was the point, obviously they won championships as well. There was Justin Roberts and Heath Slater were the tag team champions.
Justin Gabriel.
Yeah.
Gabriel, that's it.
Yeah.
And then obviously you had David Otunga and John Cena as the tag team champions in the Nexus as well. It then changed when CM Punk came and took over as the leader.
Yeah.
Barrett then went over to SmackDown and started up the Core.
Oh, the Core!
Why didn't that work? It should have worked.
Well, it was just one of these ones where they had four people who kind of only one of them really had much of a personality. The other three were obviously the two tag team, again, Gabriel and Slater. Then you had Ezekiel Jackson as the muscle, but he just never really went on to anything either. And it just never kind of clicked, really.
It also called the Core because it had two R's in it for no reason.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So it never really made much sense. I don't think they were pushed as well either. I can't remember them being champions during.
I think they were basically seen as like the Nexus losers because they were the ones who either didn't want to be in the group or were kicked out of the group, and so they're the remedial Nexus, I guess. I don't know, or just.
Hang on. So just on the spelling, WWE's littered with like changing. So they've got copyright. They changed Rhino to be RHYNO, and they changed Taz to having two Z's. And it's just like they do these things just so they've got copyright. And
the Dudley Boys just talk about a Z at the end instead of.
Yeah, you know, and Batista they dropped, even though it's his real name, they dropped the U out of Batista. But yeah, so the Nexus could have been they could have been so huge. And the thing that was flawed about it, the unfortunate thing it was clearly a great storyline and a great idea when they first became the Nexus, which obviously, and they could so easily do something around the Nexus, except for there's not really any of them still in WWE. So that's yeah, and it's like 10 years later, so it'd be difficult. But with NXT, it would be amazing if there was something where the original NXT, the Nexus, had some involvement, but. It was the idea that it's a competition, and this is why they kind of killed the concept of the original NXT, because after the first series, even though they were all competing against each other, they were instantly all a team. They were instantly... Wade Barrett had won, and yet they were all there. You know, Daniel Bryan, when he lost during the first series of the Nexus, you could see that it was... Obviously, there was an aspect where NXT was still scripted, but there was a lot of it where they didn't clue the wrestlers up, and Daniel Bryan was like, well, this Daniel Bryan guy seems to be a bit of a loser, but Bryan Danielson used to do quite well for himself, and he was clearly just a bit like, I can't believe that I'm the most experienced wrestler in this thing, and now I've been eliminated, and they've changed my name, and it's all just been a humiliation. But they brought him back, and he was part of the Nexus for one night only. until they fired him, but then had to bring him back in the SummerSlam thing, which in a sense made Daniel Bryan even bigger than if he'd been there the whole time as part of the Nexus. But the thing was, Wade Barrett was supposed to get a world title shot, and it took months where it never really happened. I think he was part of a 3-way thing. He never got his one-on-one title shot. And yet he could have been the first ever British World Heavyweight Champion, which eventually this year, 10 years later, Drew McIntyre has achieved. But we've still never had an English World Champion, ever, which seems really bizarre to me.
Well, David, you're the wrestler of the three of us. Why don't you go over there, mention it to Vince McMahon and see if it can happen?
Do you know what? I'm sure, I feel really confident, I mean this completely wholeheartedly, that I have got at least one really good match in me. I'm certain of it, right? I've spent like my whole life thinking about this. And there, like, so, and just to briefly speak on this, I know it's off topic, but you think of, like, I've said this before when we're talking about people like Goldberg, there's so many moves that you can pull off if you can't lift someone. If I can't lift up and, you know, slam Bray Wyatt because it would just squash me like a bug, right? There are so many moves you can do. There's so many things where you can, like, wrestle and do technical wrestling and moves which look like hard-hitting moves, like DDTs and stuff like this, which don't require you to necessarily have all of the skills that you need to be a professional wrestler. And I'm sure I could put together at least one very entertaining match. But
I'll also add this. I've won a wrestling match before.
You've got to tell us this story, Sam.
Oh, basically, so I used to work as an entertainer in holiday parks, and during the summer holidays, we would have a wrestling group come in once a week.
Yeah.
And it became like a bit of a running thing that I would be confident enough to cheer on the good guys and talk a bit of smack to the bad guys. And eventually, they brought me into a 3-on-2 handicap match.
Love it.
I was on the team of 3, so the good guys had like the advantage. Basically, it was really weird. The other 2 did a lot of the work. I came in, hit 2 clotheslines, went for a pin, got a 2 count, threw the guy against the ropes, hit another clothesline, and then I tagged in one of my partners, and we did a double suplex. I got tagged back in to then get the 1, 2, 3.
Wow.
Nice. Who were they by chance? Do you remember who they were?
Yeah, so they were the main event megastars, which is a promotion in Portsmouth.
Okay.
They are in some way, I think, linked to Revolution Pro Wrestling.
But say if it's Portsmouth, yeah, probably.
Yeah, and the guy,
like Andy Boy Simmons or something like that, was it?
He was in the match. Andy Boy Simmons. He's the guy who ran all of it for us.
Yeah.
Who had a match, or had a 3 matches in one night against Umaga in the WWE.
Yes,
wow.
That would have been right. Yeah.
So yeah, I know him, and I've had a match with him on my team. Me and him did the double suplex.
Yes. I need to find out who the other 3 were, but I'll ask you that off it.
Oh, okay, cool.
Okay. Yeah, go on.
But I've forgotten what we were talking about now. Oh, the Nexus, yes. So, like with the Dudley Boys as well, there's kind of a bit of, like, you could almost have a quiz of name as many of the Nexus members as you can, because there have been so many over the years, you know, even down to the lesser known ones like Mason Ryan, Ryback was part of it. Michael McGillicuddy, who's most recently been known as Curtis Axel, Husky Harris, who's now the Fiend. Yeah, there's so many different members of the Nexus, and I did always quite like them. I always thought they were quite a good heel team, but they just never really got pushed to the right level, and I think they could have done a lot more.
It's the sort of like the one stable, I think, that where, like you say, the potential for what they could have done was so great. Even if they weren't all like the most incredible, like, in-ring guys. I mean, you know, at the time, Darren Young was really green. I didn't really see a huge amount in him, but Michael Tarver was really like an awkward guy to watch wrestle and things like that. He was, you know, he was a legit fighter and things like that. He could do like the punches and stuff like that. But it was they were really comfortable watching him in ring. But everyone else had a really big upside and stuff like that. So, and you know, it's like you say, if they had been pushed and things like that, but they got their push, but if it wasn't for a certain John Cena, they might have had a bit more to go on. Because it seemed from all sort of accounts and sort of chats about the time and interviews about the time, it seems that Cena's the one that sort of seemed to the one that put the kibosh on a lot of it. You know, the SummerSlam match that you mentioned, Nexus should have won that. And Cena apparently sort of had used his sort of power to sort of get the match sort of overturned and have his side win. With that ridiculous finish where he was knocked out on outside some sort of weird shark. I can't remember where it was now. But then suddenly inside of 1 minute he eliminates Gabriel and Barrett in quick succession, and it's just like a really weird finish. And then you say the Barrett sort of title shots and things like that. He did have a one-on-one title shot, but it was Cena was the guest referee, wasn't he? I think he was going to get fired if Orton won, and if he didn't help Barrett win, and he'd be fired from the next fired from WWE as a result. And even though he never actually left because he kept hanging around backstage and kept chasing them all, and he was part of inside the Nexus, and then every other week another guy would be eliminated by him and things like that. So 1 week Tarver's suddenly gone because he's been beaten up a bit by Cena. Then Ryback got taken out because he got legit injured. He got suffered like a bad broken leg or something like that, didn't he? Random match somewhere, and he obviously got taken out for that reason. So unfortunately for Cena and unfortunate incidents outside of their control, they had their run of bad luck. And I think by the time that CM Punk came along to sort of try and save it a little bit, that didn't go anywhere either. And sort of like by the time Cena got his Money in the Bank match, and it was technically still part of the new Nexus, but there was no new Nexus to lead, so it was sort of just forgotten about. But did you see the wrestling news in the news this week, where apparently, according to Darren Young, the Nexus were due to return at WrestleMania 36?
I did see that, yes.
Wait.
He claims. So it's a VP show. Apparently, Darren Young claimed an interview with the VP show that Nexus were penciled in to return at WrestleMania 36, and the plans only changed when the global health crisis forced them to move the show from Tampa to their performance center.
What?
So the lack of live crowd.
What have they done?
Would go frosty on return of the group.
No, that doesn't make any sense. Ryback doesn't seem like he's on any kind of good terms with them.
Ryback and Wade Barrett would not have been part of it, but had Heath Slater was part of it, he was still void. So
okay, so
there's a potential there, but
wait a minute. So who would?
That's what's reported.
So, but Justin Gabriel is in Ring of Honor.
It's PJ Black in Ring of Honor. Yeah,
and he doesn't look like a spring chicken. He looks quite visually different now. Heath Slater, he's been jobbed out to high heaven. He doesn't seem like he would mean absolutely anything. Ryback's not on good terms with him, but obviously he would have been like the heavy. So he would have, if he could have made a comeback and they'd not just destroyed him like they always did, then he could have seemed good. Wade Barrett doesn't even wrestle. He's now a commentator for NWA. Yeah. So look at that! You get like room service. It's amazing, Dave. That's fantastic.
You say that.
Yeah. Waiter.
Yeah. Obviously, it's not necessarily the most credible story. It does come from What Culture, so that's what apparently he reckons. So imagine it was without Barrett and Skip Sheffield right back. It would have been
Michael
Slater,
Tarver.
So Slater, Tarver, Young.
Daniel Bryan,
maybe he might have spearheaded it.
He's the only one that could be the potential leader of it.
Yeah. I suppose they could put Curtis Axel in there as well.
Axel, well, he's been released recently as well, hasn't he? So
wow.
Part of it. I'm trying to think of the other ones were now. Slater, Gabriel. I can't remember. It doesn't matter.
David Otunga.
It's nothing. Sorry, it obviously didn't happen, but they maybe could have made the numbers up with some guys from NXT, I guess.
Yeah. Well, if it'd been like a new version of the Nexus, but yeah, certainly. Okay, Dave, who would you like to bring up?
Oh, who would I like to bring up? That's a good question.
If we bring up a couple more like big ones each.
We can't go through this whole thing about great teams in our time without talking about the Hart Foundation.
Yes.
Hart Foundation. So, obviously, the Hart Foundation started off as a three-man unit. Bret Hart, Jimmy Anvil Died Hart, and the Mouse of the South, Jimmy Hart. Obviously their manager, but obviously that was just tag team and manager, which isn't necessarily a stable, but they were obviously one of the better teams through the late 80s into the early 90s. They had their little, they did the rare thing of having a tag team split without them feuding, which is really good.
Yeah.
Decided to go separate ways for like solo careers, and but of course the Hart Foundation I'm talking about really is the one that turned up in 1997 when Bret did his whole Bret Hart versus USA crusade and Canada versus the USA. Then a week after he'd done that, he stopped the feud between Owen Hart and British Bulldog, who were having their difficulties with each other, and had that wonderful moment where he's saying, "Look, we've all been feuding with each other for the last 4 or 5 years. That's because these American fans don't like the idea of family. They don't understand family." And like it says, "Look, Davey, I love you. Owen, I love you." And Owen like tearfully going, "I love you too," and they're all coming together. It was a beautiful moment. If it wasn't for the fact that you can see Bret like staring out at the crowd, like that really great gaze that he gives the crowd, where he's like, "Yeah, I know exactly what I'm doing." Where the crowd are booing and everything like that. It's sort of it's a brilliant moment. But then as the weeks go by, Jim Neidhart returns, and then Brian Pillman's part of the group as well by proxy, because he's had his problems with Austin anyway, but he's also really good friends of the Harts.
Trained in the dungeon.
So he's part of Stampede Wrestling.
Yeah.
So and it was just a beautiful couple of months where they were all just together and causing absolute havoc and doing this wonderful Canada versus the world, versus USA thing, where they were heels in the US and faces everywhere else. It was just a moment in time that no one else could do but Bret and Co.
Yeah.
Especially, I would say Bret and Co. I mean, particularly Bret, Owen, and Pillman. To an extent, Davey Anvil was sort of just there, but
yeah.
But I think particularly Bret, Owen, and Pillman were the sort of like the real sort of personality parts of that made it work.
So the interesting thing, obviously, with the Harts, and when you say the Hart Foundation, is that they also have an extended legacy in several directions. Obviously, in more recent years, you've had the Hart Dynasty, which was Davey Boy Smith's son, Harry Smith. So D.H. Smith, or Davey Boy Smith Jr., as he's variously known. Natty Neidhart, daughter of Jim the Anvil. And Tyson Kidd, who is married to Natty, but also one of the last people that trained properly in the dungeon through that. And Teddy Hart, who never made it properly onto WWE TV, which always a crying shame. And then, if rumours like he's like connected to crimes and murders, and
he's not
drugs or all sorts of things. I'm not trying to defame him, but these are all kinds of rumours and things you read at the moment. So. Where like apparently his girlfriend had gone missing or something, and people are still suspicious about that. I know nothing of it at all.
There's some sort of link or something like that where someone who was into has gone missing. Also, he's very much accused of abusing his current girlfriend as well, and who's another wrestler, Maria Manic, and all this other sort of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that he's a very troubled guy. All the talent in the world, but. He's had a lot of troubles, and most of it sort of brought himself by all counts, allegedly.
Yeah, but and obviously, so other than that, in Major League Wrestling, there was a version of the Hart Foundation with Teddy Hart, with British Bulldog son Harry Smith, or Davey Boy Smith Jr. as he'll call himself, and with Flying Brian Pillman Jr. So Brian Pillman Jr. So the Hart legacy has continued on. Yes. Madness to me that they haven't snapped up Brian Pillman Jr. and Bulldog son for WWE rather. But when you go in the other direction, obviously the Hart family, the Hart dynasty, however you want to say it, started with Stu Hart and his wife Helen Hart, then having like 14 children, of which all of the boys became wrestlers. So we've mentioned Bret Hart and Owen Hart, but then there was Bruce Hart, there was Keith Hart. I'm trying to remember what the other boys were. Smith Hart.
So the main ones were like Bruce was like the main one where he went like he tried to like relaunch Stampede when Bret had gone and Owen had gone and all that sort of stuff. And it was that Survivor Series match, wasn't there? It was Bret, Owen,
the Knights,
Bruce, and Keith, wasn't there?
Yeah.
I think I don't know if Dean Hart was I don't know if Dean Hart ever got in the ring, but I know he was the first one to sadly pass away just before the 1990 Survivor Series. I think they all at some point wrestled, yeah.
And all of the sisters, all of them married wrestlers too, which is like the interesting thing. Which is where, and the interesting thing when you look at the original Hart Foundation, there was Bret Hitman Hart, then there was his brother-in-law Jim the Anvil Neidhart, and it was just an amazing coincidence that his surname was Neidhart, so it got Hart within the word. And then Jimmy Mouth of the South Hart, and that was his. Don't know if it's his real name, but it's his stage name, if nothing else. And there was just another guy that was called Hart. So you had the Hart Foundation. And then, as you mentioned, Jim and Bret went separate ways, and that led to the new foundation, which I guess was a continuation of the Hart Foundation with Jim Neidhart and the Rocket Owen Hart. Before they did this Survivor Series match, which was originally going to be Jerry Lawler and his Knights versus the Hart Foundation, which was Bret and Owen and Keith and Bruce. And Shawn Michaels ended up replacing Jerry Lawler because Jerry Lawler was accused of something or other at the time. And Owen was the only one from the Harts to get pinned. Other than that, they clean sweeped out all of the Knights and Shawn Michaels, which led to Owen Hart coming back down and then attacking Bret because he had been the only one that didn't win. And they had a little bit of a falling out, but then they came back together. I think they were going for the tag team titles at that year's Royal Rumble. And again, Owen turned on Bret, which...
Kicked your leg out the leg.
I kicked your leg out your leg. One of the unfortunate blooper promos of all time. But it led to one of the greatest wrestling matches of all time. Sam, if you've not seen it, Owen Hart versus Bret Hart at WrestleMania 10. The idea was...
Opening match.
Sorry?
The opening match.
The opening match. A match that couldn't be followed. But the idea of it was that both Bret Hart and Lex Luger had co-won the Royal Rumble. They were both eliminated at the same time. And Yokozuna was the world champion. And so they did a coin toss. And Lex Luger would get a shot at Yokozuna. Whoever wins that match would then fight Bret Hart. Now, if it had been the other way around, then Bret Hart would have got the match with Yokozuna, and then Lex Luger would have wrestled, whatever. But the idea was that because the winner of Yokozuna versus Lex Luger would have already wrestled a match, then Bret Hart had another opponent at WrestleMania, which was his brother Owen. In this opening match, which Owen won. And the story goes that apparently, literally the day before, they'd laid out this match, and it was going to be a great match, and it was going to, Owen would have done all of his athletic stuff. And Bret said that he suddenly had the realization that Owen's the heel, that he needs to cheat, he needs to get one move in and start celebrating and do everything to come across like a little sneaky, scumbag that the crowd are really going to turn on and sympathise with Bret. But he got a clean win. So there was a victory roll, which Bret Hart had beat the British Bulldog. No, who did Bret Hart beat with the victory roll, Dave? Do you remember?
Would have been, I don't know, Bam Bigelow, King of the Ring, maybe?
Yeah, it could have been. Either way, he was repeating a finish that he'd done. Or it may have been against Roddy Piper, I can't remember.
Some movies used to win matches before.
Some move but it was like a finish where Bret Hart had done a victory roll and maybe won the Intercontinental Championship against Roddy Piper. That's what's coming to my head. Either way, so he goes for the victory roll, but Owen just stops it halfway through. You never see a victory roll anymore. You should do. It's a great move. And Owen gets the win, and so then Owen's like, yeah, I'm the better Bret. I'm the better Bret. I'm the better Hart. I'm the better brother. I always told you I was the best. Now will you believe me? It's coming across so whiny, and Owen had got this great voice for when he would be complaining and whiny. It would really come across so heelish. He'd then go on to win the King of the Ring that year, and for years, Bret versus Owen, SummerSlam, and then years follow, Bret and Owen hated each other. And as said, Brian Pillman turned up, and he would give this sense that I'm bringing Bret and I'm bringing Owen back together. And Bret was like, no, you're not. That's not happening. And it seemed to go nowhere for literally months until they decided that, yeah, we're going to do this thing where Bulldog and Owen, who had been tag team together in Camp Cornette, which is another faction, They were suddenly feuding with each other, but Bret stopped them and suddenly reunited the Hart Foundation. And when we speak about, like earlier when I said about you get well, who would you get, like Evolution, or you get, like I said, the version of the Four Horsemen with Benoit and Malenko and Anderson and Flair. When you look at a stable and it's got Bret Hart, the British Bulldog, Owen Hart, Brian Pillman, Jim Neidhart was also kind of there, like you say, Dave. But you know, when you get these four of the best wrestlers of their time all in one stable, they seemed utterly unstoppable.
And like I say, it was just the story that they were sort of like formed in and being part of, and just sort of adapting to sort of like what was happening at the times as well. You know, sort of like Bret's sort of real life sort of feelings about how he didn't like the direction that the world was going, where people were cheering the bad guys and booing the good guys and things like that. And he still wanted to have and his own little world in terms of what he wanted to stand for. He was still standing for what he believed in, and his group did the same thing. But just in America, they just happened to be the bad guys, and everywhere else they happened to be the good guys.
Is there anywhere else where that's happened?
Worked. I can't think of anyone else has done that, you know. Maybe like interpromotional things like that. I mean, maybe sort of like on the independents. I think Ring of Honor and CZW had like an interpromotional feud where if like Ring of Honor talents were in a CZW show, they would get booed, but if they would be the opposite way around in the Ring of Honor show, that sort of thing. But not in terms of on a national scale, international scale.
Yeah. Wow. Sam, any thoughts on the Hearts? What's
yeah, well, I don't really know too much about the original Hart Foundation. The only time I really remember Bret Hart coming into WWE was when he came back after years and years away and had a feud with Vince McMahon. It was that kind of time, which is, you know, obviously not the best impression of Bret Hart that you could ever get. But yeah, they're obviously mentioned quite a lot, and obviously I know about the newer Hart Foundation with Tyson Kidd, Natalia, and D.H. Smith, as he was then. But I don't really know too much about the original. It's quite interesting, obviously, seeing sort of how impassioned both of you get about them. There's a lot of affection towards them from both.
Still real to me, damn it.
Yeah.
I would just have to watch some '97 Raw and things like that, and to see like the formation of them and the thing, and going out to like the Calgary Stampede show, which is still one of the best pay-per-views of all time, which I think we've mentioned before on the show.
Yeah, the audience
definitely
there,
worth a watch.
The audience there, it was real to them. They were, you know, and Owen scored the victory there, so you know.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, David.
Me? Oh, right. I thought that was mine. Right. Okay. I'm going to mention. I'm going to mention the guys behind me. So the NWO.
Oh, it's a long list.
Okay, so there's a long list of people who are in it. But in terms of wrestling factions, this one is probably the one that's changed wrestling the most. Now, people say D-Generation X as part of the same conversation, but you can't talk about D-Generation X without mentioning the NWO, and there wouldn't have been a D-Generation X if there hadn't have been an NWO. This was the first time, and this probably led into the stuff we just mentioned about with Bret Hart, where a group of heels were cool, and these were the cool heels where you'd cheer them. And it came about when Razor Ramon left WWF for WCW. And when he left WWF for WCW, the perfect storm happened where within a few weeks, Diesel left WWF for WCW as well. Now, they'd both previously been in WCW, as we saw a couple of weeks ago with Kevin Nash as Oz. But when they left, the way they did it was so different than anything that had been done before. Scott Hall, so Razor Ramon, he turned up and he just interrupted a match. He came in through the crowd. The commentators were like, "Well, what's this guy doing here? You know, he used to wrestle here, but now he doesn't wrestle here anymore." And he came in the ring. He beat some people up. And he says, "Now I know you know." Where's my toothpick? Right, got to do the Scott Hall thing properly. He's like, "So I know that you know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here." Hang on, I'm going to make it even more authentic. I'm really going for this impression here, Sam. but you don't know why I'm here. And he went away, and like it seemed like, well, sorry about that, this person obviously doesn't work here, and he interrupted. And then a few weeks pass, where he turns up again, causes some havoc, and then suddenly Kevin Nash starts turning up, and they start getting in the face of Eric Bischoff, who's a commentator on Nitro at the time, and he's like, what are you doing here? And they're really putting this idea as if these guys are showing up as if they've been sent there by WWF, that the WWF has sent them there to beat up the WCW wrestlers, sent there to be dominant over WCW from the WWF. So when you, a moment ago, Dave, you spoke about Ring of Honor and CCW may have had a thing where people would be cheering Combat Zone Wrestling wrestlers if they've invaded the competition or vice versa. The WCW fans who have paid to turn up and watch WCW would see these two WWF guys get in the ring. And even though that Razor Ramon was, really popular in WWF, he was now a bad guy because he was an invader. Literally, he was an outsider. So as this tandem became known, they were the outsiders. And they teased that there is a third man. There is someone else who will be joining them. And they agreed to have a match at the 1996 Bash at the Beach pay-per-view. And it was Randy Macho Man Savage, Sting and Lex Luger against Scott Hall, Kevin Nash and their mystery tag team partner. Now, I can imagine that Vince McMahon at the time was looking at his locker room and thinking, who is about to jump ship? Because they'd already had Lex Luger just suddenly turn up on WCW. They'd already seen people like Hulk Hogan and Mean Gene and Randy Savage and people that were traditionally associated to WWF turn up on WCW. So I can only imagine that Vince McMahon would look in his locker room and think, well, Hall and Nash left. I knew that their contracts were up and they were leaving. Now they say that there's another one coming. It's got to be one of someone who's here currently. Who could it be? When it actually got to the show, Hall and Nash, even though it was two heels. So earlier, Sam, I think you mentioned about like you were on the 3-man team against the two heels when you had a match. There was the three faces being dominated by the two outsiders, Hall and Nash, and Randy Savage was down in the ring, and the good guys, the WCW faithful, they're on the verge of defeat, and suddenly marching down the aisle in the yellow and the red, it's Hulk Hogan, and he's going to deal with them. He gets in the ring, Hall and Nash back away like this. Hogan bounces off the rope and drops the atomic leg drop onto Randy Savage. And turning heel in that moment. And then he gets on the microphone and he tells the fans, and this was outrageous at the time, he tells the fans to stick it. The audience start throwing rubbish, cans, paper, bottles, everything at Hall and Nash. Mean Gene Okerlund's trying to interview them in the ring. And he's like, and there's all this crap being thrown in the ring. Because clearly Mean Gene wasn't happy that he's being pelted as well. And Hogan's like, and we're part of the New World Organization, as he incorrectly said at the time. He did call it the New World Order, but then he forgot the name of it during the first promo. So good job there, Hogan. And he forms the NWO, who were... Obviously, Hulk Hogan, if you've got Hall and Nash and they've invaded from WWF, who is more associated with WWF, WWE from all of history rather than Hulk Hogan? So he was like the brains behind it. And in the weeks and months that would follow, you'd get the $1 Million Man being the money guy behind it. You would get Six, you'd get the Giant, so X-Pac would join, the Big Show would join. And they were just this unstoppable faction where, again, you've got a 7-foot tall guy in Kevin Nash. You've got a 7'4" guy, as they would say he was at the time, in the Big Show. You get Hulk Hogan, the biggest star in wrestling ever. Scott Hall, who was like 6'7", former Intercontinental Champion. The $1 Million Man, and then obviously your 1, 2, 3 kids also there, but he's like the athletic karate wrestling style guy. And it was just, they were unstoppable. But then eventually, as time went on, it kind of lost its way. There was one of the greatest storylines of all time with Sting becoming the black and white Sting from the Surfer Sting days, where he was just being accused of joining the NWO, but then he sort of just grew distant with everyone, and you'd just see him, and he'd lost all of his colour. He's just black and white Sting, like the movie The Crow. He'd be up in the rafters, and then eventually he'd start propelling to the ring. He'd have a baseball bat, and he'd take on the NWO. And it was a great storyline to defeat the NWO, but you can't defeat the NWO because that's what's selling all the t-shirts. So this story could never end. And eventually, the NWO split into half, which wasn't necessarily bad, with the NWO Black and White and the NWO Wolfpack, which was who had a great theme tune, by the way, but they were red and black. So you'd have two different NWOs, and suddenly Kevin Nash is the leader of the NWO Wolfpack, and Randy Savage is joining them, even though he'd been in the NWO as well, but was also associated to WCW. And so you'd have NWO versus NWO, and WCW was in there, and the Four Horsemen were also doing their thing. And then there was the LWO, led by Eddie Guerrero, who wasn't a big star at the time. He was a great wrestler, but not a big star. And there was so many versions. ECW was mocking it with the BWO, the Blue World Order. And eventually you ended up where Kevin Nash, Hulk Hogan, all these people have left the NWO, yet the NWO is still there. And now it's being led by Virgil. And he's having, and even Virgil, as Vincent, as he was known at the time, is having a feud with Stevie Ray, Booker T's brother, to see which one of us will be the leader of the NWO. And by this stage, we're like, nobody cares anymore. And they kind of let it completely run its course, and it ran out of steam in the end. But
hang on, Stevie Ray and Vincent had a feud over who'd be the leader of the NWO.
Yeah, do you not remember this?
Do you not mean the B team?
The what?
The NWO B team.
What's the NWO B team?
Wouldn't that have been more? I don't. I'm just trying to. We got to the point where Vincent and Stevie Ray were like the head honchos of the entire NWO.
Yeah, exactly.
It would have been more likely. But
no, it had gone down. To such a point. So look, I'm gonna check.
They had like the B team, didn't they, for a little while? It was like they had different music. They were sort of like they had the established guys there. You had your B team guys over here.
Oh yeah, the B team.
Slightly different music.
Okay, so this may be the B team, but hang on, let's have a look.
Okay, I just never heard that. Everybody contesting Vincent leading the NWO.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just see. It says the B team, but I don't know.
Sorry, I'm probably mistaken.
I don't know that the B team was the B team ever something said on television. Or was
I'm
it
pretty
just?
Sure they were. They had different music or everything else. They had like the little.
From Bo Dallas.
No, okay. So I'm yeah, but no. Listen to this. So I'm on the Wikipedia, and it says this ties into what I said. It says, however, while Hogan, Hall, Nash, Steiner, Lex Luger, Conan, Buff Bagwell, Eric Bischoff, and Miss Elizabeth were part of the Wolfpack, the undercard wrestlers in the NWO, the Giant, Kurt Hennig, Horace Hogan, Stevie Ray, Bryan Adams, and Vincent, were still in the black and white colours of NWO Hollywood and were never officially assimilated back into the group. Okay, so this short-lived group was sardonically labelled the NWO B team by fans and commentators. I don't think they said that. I think it...
fair enough.
To my memory, they were still the NWO. And so whilst all of the cool guys had left for the Wolfpack, or just left NWO in total, it says this B team was a staple of WCW programming throughout 99.
Oh, NWO Black and White, right.
And Stevie Ray was eventually made their leader. This B version of the NWO consisted of Stevie Ray, Vincent, Horace Hogan, Scott Norton, and Bryan Adams. Wow.
That doesn't scream NWO to me, that one.
It's not the NWO.
Fair enough. Oh, well, I'm mistaken then. Yeah, sorry.
Any other thoughts or memories of the NWO, Dave? We seem to have lost Sam for a little bit.
He's back in a second, I think. He's just doing what I've done a few times in this during this part. But
there is back now. Blood of the size of a grape, unfortunately.
Mate, I've already been twice, or at least not including the show earlier. So
I'm like a camel, guys. Like a camel.
So where were you in the history? Sorry, we got to.
Okay, so there was the NWO B team. Apparently, I'd never heard them labelled that before, but I think that was just what people called them, rather than it being on TV. So it kind of fizzled out, as best I remember. It fizzled out where everyone left the NWO. They weren't part of the Wolfpack, and there was probably the whole thing with Vince Russo coming in to be the booker. And I remember, the next thing I remember of the NWO is when they tried to bring it back as a new idea, and it was silver and black rather than red and black, rather than white and black. And it was Bret Hart, it was, I think, maybe Scott Steiner, Kevin Nash, and Jeff Jarrett, and they were the NWO in about the year 2000. Which, as a nostalgia thing and bringing something back, it was far, far too soon. And it only lasted a very short time. And in fact, this may be what it says here as NWO 2000. But it didn't last very long, and that was the end of it, and they didn't try it again in WCW. But eventually, and Sam, this may be where you know the NWO, they brought in the NWO into WWE after WWE bought it. And when they'd bought WCW, Hogan wasn't part of it. He hadn't been part of WCW because he had sued them, and then no longer part of WCW after Bash at the Beach year 2000. Kevin Nash had stayed with his WCW contract and hadn't been part of the invasion. Scott Hall had been fired by WCW in about 1999. Oh, sorry, in about year 2000, and WWF hadn't picked him up again anyway. But then in 2002, WWF, shockingly, and WWF has got loads of examples, and I've probably mentioned this before, where they could have done things which would have been huge surprises, which would have got the audience absolutely buzzing. But they decided to do things in backstage segments and kill their own excitement and momentum, where they had Vince McMahon on a chair, feuding with Ric Flair, who was now co-owner of WWF. He's like, I'm going to have to kill my own creation. I'm going to bring back the NWO. And he turned around on his chair so that on the back of his chair you could see a reflection in a mirror that he was talking to, because he's talking to himself, where obviously it was written backwards, was the NWO logo. So everyone knew that Vince McMahon was bringing in the NWO, and the logic of that. So even if they were doing the storyline with Vince McMahon and Ric Flair, what they should have done is they should have had Vince McMahon and Ric Flair, either Vince McMahon wins so that you can have WWF versus NWO, or they should have had Vince McMahon and Ric Flair feuding with each other, where suddenly they're forced to have to join together against the threat of the NWO coming in. Because the NWO, being brought in by Vince McMahon, it kind of ruined the idea in the same way of Steve Austin being on the same side of Vince McMahon. The NWO were like Steve Austin in that they were rebels. They were something against authority. They were the outsiders, pun intended. So the NWO coming in, and it was great when they did it, because it was at the pay-per-view event called No Way Out, which WWE had been doing for years, and this was just how one of these amazing things lined up, that No Way Out is NWO. And so if they'd just done the pay-per-view and suddenly the No Way Out sign had transformed on the Titantron, people would have been shocked. But Hogan, Hall, Nash came out at the start of this pay-per-view, and they gave it was cool to see them. And they were what was particularly cool is they were super excited for Scott Hall to be there, just because he hadn't been on any TV in a couple of years. But they were super humble, hey, we're just fans, we just want to be, you guys, hang out with the boys, have a few drinks. And they should have come in like the NWO did in WCW, where they should have just turned up and did what the Nexus did when they eventually did the Nexus, and decimated everyone. They should have ripped apart the ring, ripped apart the arena, powerbombed Vince McMahon, dropped a leg drop on Jim Ross, done all of this stuff, and been we're taking over now. But they didn't do it. And by WrestleMania, this was at No Way Out, which may have been in February. By WrestleMania in April that year, Hall and Nash turned on Hogan after one of the greatest matches of all time, Hogan versus The Rock. And so suddenly the leader of the NWO, Hulk Hogan, was no longer part of it. Within another month, Scott Hall had been fired. So quickly they brought back Shawn Michaels to join the NWO, even though he had never been part of the original NWO. And at this time, Shawn Michaels hadn't come back to wrestle. X-Pac was now part of it, and he'd previously been in it. The Giant, the Big Show, was now part of it. He'd been part of it. They had Booker T in it. They were doing some stuff where is Goldust part of it or not, and it just quickly seemed like a joke. And I can't remember who the authority figure was at the time, whether it was Vince McMahon or Commissioner Foley or Commissioner Sergeant Slaughter. Someone just said, no, we're not having an NWO anymore, and just shut it down. And they literally just wiped the storyline out. And other than
after Kevin Nash ripped another leg muscle, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's true.
Tag match.
That's it. And so without Kevin Nash,
right, that's too many times now. This is actually failing on us. We need to
Yeah, they killed it. And so since then, the NWO has only existed really when they do D-Generation X NWO combined reunions, so Triple H can hang out with his friends on like NXT. I think they did it once, and on the Raw 10 millionth episode anniversary. And then the only other time of any note was Triple H versus Sting at WrestleMania, and this didn't even quite make sense. The match was a little bit sloppy just because Sting was a little bit too past it for his own good. And D-Generation X came out to attack Sting to help Triple H. And then the NWO came out, even though the story was that he was feuding classically with the NWO. The NWO came out to help Sting. And so it was almost like Teddy Long should have come out and be like, now we're going to have a triple threat match. Not a triple match, a tag team turmoil match, player. He should have come out. It felt like that, where basically they should have done this, or they should have done it at the next pay-per-view, where Sting versus Triple H was what it was, but the next pay-per-view should have given the people what they wanted, with giving it DX versus NWO, because that dream match literally has never happened.
Yeah, and never will by the looks of things.
No, how can it?
Exactly.
Well, problem was that when involved in the NWO side of things was we're retired, so we never gotten like a full match out of it. I don't think Scott Hall has ever like wrestled a match like since he sort of came back on the wagon, has he? So
no. And yeah, like the interesting thing is Hogan was saying so much about wanting a match at this year's WrestleMania, and it was never clarified whether or not that was actually a possibility or just him saying it. But because of the whole COVID thing, that will probably never ever happen now.
Yeah. It was the most amazing thing about that situation there with the DX versus NWO thing was that Hogan took a bump for X-Pac in that match. It was amazing.
Yeah.
X-Pac knocks him down. I was like, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, anything... Sam, what do you want to add on the NWO?
Just like you say, they were very, very cool. You know, the fact that... obviously, I don't remember a lot, but I can remember... I've rewatched the whole thing of like when the crowd started throwing all of their rubbish into the ring. The fact they spray painted the World Heavyweight Championship as well was just like a kind of defacing it and making it their thing as well. So yeah, like you say, very, very cool team.
Yeah. Anything to add, Dave?
Yeah, quite. Reasonably, groundbreaking, and certainly in terms of like the States and the Western sort of world. I mean, I don't know if you mentioned it, but I think Eric Bischoff had the idea of it from a New Japan show.
Yeah, I didn't. But
they had like a little bit of invasion sort of like thing happen there, and certainly they were. It was groundbreaking. I mean, I've said on here before. Did actually watch the NWO formation on the DSF channel, German channel, and whatnot. So didn't get to hear Heenan saying, but whose side is he on and all that sort of stuff. But so interesting to see that all formation. Really interesting factoid is that the original NWO videos, or like the jump cuts and things like that, happened. Do you know why that happened?
I do actually, but do you want to say?
Yeah, well, Hulk Hogan was doing all these promos. They were just rambling nonsense, and he wasn't really fully sort of like going where they wanted to go with it. So they had to like cut bits there of them out, and you realise that you just like put little bits of them here and there, like with interspersing with Hall and Nash. And it just ended up being this all like quite cool little package of promos that weren't necessarily like the full thing. Apparently, because Hogan was just like not in like wasn't going along with the story and things like that. They had to cut bits out, and that's how they sort of like ended up with the jump cut stuff. But the main problem with the NWO was it went on too long with way too many people involved in the NWO. The best thing that Chris Jericho ever did in WCW was the fact that he didn't join the NWO. He was a heel in WCW. He was still on that side of the fence, but he didn't join the NWO. That's what helped him stand out. I think he was offered a few times to join, but he always said no. I don't want to do that. So I want to like branch out my own. Which is the best thing he ever really did. So yeah, I mean, the list of people that were a part of the NWO was just way too many. And like I said, the cool factor was there, certainly, but when they are the bad guy faction that is like trying to take over the WCW, and WCW is looked at as the sad side of the sad sack of the fence. They ended up making their own company look uncool.
They did,
which didn't necessarily go. I don't know if you guys watched the last week with the gimmicks discussion. I sort of recommended one of the Legends of Wrestling episodes. There's another one on there about stables and about factions. And Flair says that Ric Flair said that the NWO was the worst thing that ever happened to wrestling because of like the fact that it just made it took out it made a mockery of its own genre of entertainment and its own genre of wrestling and things like that, and made a mockery out of it, and made a mockery out of WCW to the point where they weren't credible.
The interesting thing at the time, especially when you look in modern times where there is NXT or where there is Raw and SmackDown as their own brands, which I don't think they ever quite made a good job of separating them, as Raw is its own company, SmackDown is its own company, because they always use this term brand. And what does that really mean? People understand WCW and they understand WWE or WWF as two separate entities. Raw and SmackDown, it's like, well, it's both the same thing, either way. But there was talk back in the day that NWO would split off and be its own thing. To the point that when they had the pay-per-view, which happened at least twice, NWO sold out. It was, and sold was spelled like soul, like you got soul. SOULED, sold out. It was a terrible pay-per-view. It didn't really work, but that was meant to be the launch of kind of NWO being its own show, and perhaps perhaps WCW Thunder, may have been just an NWO show, and it being its own promotion. Because what WWF would later try to do, and I would say arguably it's never really worked with the brand extension, is try and replicate WCW versus WWF with the idea of Raw versus SmackDown. But before any of that happened, WCW were saying, well, it's WCW Nitro versus Monday Night Raw, but actually the way we can win is just by making people really interested in WCW versus NWO. So cut your opponent out of the competition and make the competition something you can completely control. But like I say, because they added all these wrestlers to it, so they'd have such a big roster of NWO wrestlers to perhaps even have their own brand. It was a problem, where to the point that WCW used to do the massive Battle Royal event, their closest equivalent to the Royal Rumble, which was called World War III. And so, like, Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine at the time would have jokes that here comes the WCW pay-per-view World War III, which is going to be 56 members of the NWO and the Four Horsemen. Okay, let's move on from the NWO. Let's perhaps do some honourable mentions of things, but let's choose like a big last one each to mention. Sam.
Well, I would go. Obviously we mentioned a couple earlier on that we've not really gone into too much detail on, like the Undisputed Era, Imperium, possibly a couple or New Day as well. We mentioned. I think in very, very recent times, I would just give a very nice nod to the Inner Circle in AEW. I really like him. It's like the first time Chris Jericho has been in a stable properly. He's leading it. They are quite funny. I think sometimes their humour goes a bit too far, but in terms of their actual in-ring ability, they're very, very good as well. So I really like the Inner Circle.
Yeah, I think the Inner Circle are great. I think they do for AEW kind of a little bit like what DX or NWO did for WWF or WCW, in that you've got this very dominant faction where like the leader is obviously Jericho, one of the best on the mic. Then you've got like the big heavy Jake Hager. You've got Sammy Guevara, which kind of fulfills that X-Pac in NWO or DX role, that he's sort of like the one that you could find irritating, the little guy who's kind of cocky and stuff. And then you got the tag team, which was like the Hall and Nash or like the New Age Outlaws in those equivalent groups. So it's a really well put together faction.
Yeah, and it's like we were saying earlier about it's a mixture of the established and the new guys. So it's like Jericho and Hager are like there to sort of give the establishment to the newer guys, sort of Santana and Ortiz, and especially with Guevara. I think Guevara's stock has risen so much since in this last year since AEW started. Is he was a guy that I was aware of, but never really sort of took much notice of, and come to sort of regret that now.
He used to come out dressed as a panda.
Hmm?
He used to come out dressed. His gimmick would be he'd come out wearing like a panda hat, and he hasn't done that since I think the first week of Dynamite.
Yeah, but he's got the things that are established, like fun little facials, like the hug with Jericho he does every week, which is exactly the same facials all the time. It's hilarious. And although he's been the fall guy in these matches, these big matches, he's often been the star of them as well. Yeah. So, did you want to give any more honourable mentions, Sam?
Let me just quickly check my list. The British Strong Style. I don't really know loads about.
Oh yeah. I know loads about British Strong Style. I was there at the formation.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned on the watch along that we did, the Irish promotion that we watched.
OTT, yeah.
Yeah, OTT, that's the one. I've never really seen them too much in a team together, but I know they are a huge thing. I know that they talk about Pete Dunne, Tyler Bate, and Trent Seven as the foundation pillars of which NXT UK was made on, which I think is a lot of praise to give to, especially Pete Dunne and Tyler Bate. They're two very young guys.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'll say I was there like when they sort of started up. They were, it was Pete and Trent that started as a team originally. This is all in progress. In 2016, I want to say. So they sort of formed a team where they sort of turned on their respective tag partners. So Pete was like in a team with his storyline with his brother, in quotation marks, so Damien Dunne, who some people might know better now as Chief Deputy Dunne of the Anti-Fun Police. Hopefully at some point we'll come across those characters. So it was a challenge with him, the Dunne brothers against Moustache Mountain, Trent and Tyler, and shockingly, it was actually Trent turning on Tyler in that match, in a match up there, and then Pete immediately turning on Damien as well. Both the legal men, they just walked out of the match, got double count out, and established themselves as British Strong Style. So Tyler wasn't originally part of it. It wasn't until like a match where there was a situation in progress where the title had to be vacated. Mark Haskins was champion. He had to vacate because he was told he basically had a bunch of career-ending injuries, which turned out thankfully to be not true. But so he had to vacate the title, and they had this big multi-man match, which both Trent and Pete were in, and Pete ended up winning with the assistance of Tyler. So that sort of started off with the three-man British Strong Style. As I say, that for British independent wrestling, they just took the ball and ran with it. They established this concept of British Strong Style, which was kind of started with Fight Club Pro, which is their sort of home promotion in Wolverhampton, which their sort of like style was Strong Style. They've obviously established it as British Strong Style. So they've not only established a style of wrestling that they can sort of pinpoint as the Midlands sort of like a type of wrestling, but they also went on just to dominate Progress, and then so much so they had to like establish themselves in other promotions as well, even if it wasn't befitting that company's storyline and things like that. And like you say, it was those three that were like the benchmark that sort of started off with NXT UK. If you ever saw the starting blocks of them, anytime any like NXT UK people were represented in other things, it would be those three and maybe Mark Andrews and Wolfgang, something like that. There would be those sort of five that would sort of be the initial sort of starting blocks for them in terms of like, this is our new brand, this is what we're establishing. And I mean, NXT UK is not my favourite brand in wrestling. I won't give it too much of I won't crap on it too much, but it's not my favourite thing. So, in terms of how that has begun, it does start with those three.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so we're on the honourable mentions, are we?
Yeah. Sorry, I just went a little bit.
No. It's like, okay, so any other honourable mentions either of you have got? I'm trying to think.
I've got a few. We'll mention them earlier as the ones that didn't necessarily have a name, but I will call them the Heenan family. So Bobby Heenan and managers of that time often had their own little stable of wrestlers. They just happened to be people managed by the same person. So, but Heenan in particular, because he had like Andre the Giant, Haku, the Barbarian, Mr. Perfect, all at one point as well, and all that sort of people. He had the amount of people he'd had at the time was quite incredible. Rick Rude as well. All sorts of very good stuff. Mentioned him earlier, Team Extreme. I will say I think are a stable because they're it was almost like it was finally the thing that stuck for the Hardys, because the Hardys were teamed with Michael Hayes, that didn't stick. They were teamed with Gangrel, that didn't stick. So with Terry Reynolds, that didn't stick at all. Later, finally, they got the three that sticks with each other, and they just worked really, really well. I'm trying to think of we've mentioned the other ones on my list. I mean, I've got plenty on my list of stables that maybe weren't so great, but we can talk about that in a second if you want. You got any honorable mentions, David? Very good. Okay.
Okay, so I will mention the Elite, just because obviously if there was no Elite, there would be no All Elite Wrestling. So whether or not this to me is a stable that really haven't cemented their legacy as of yet. Not that they don't have one. They've been around probably for about 2015, 16, 17 as the Elite, as a kind of spin-off breakout thing from Bullet Club. I often have a Bullet Club shirt. I don't today. But obviously there was the Bullet Club, which is kind of a New Japan Pro Wrestling rehash of the NWO, to put it in crude terms, just because there's so many similarities. They're black. They wear black and white. Their music is literally too sweet. They do the too sweet thing from the NWO. Their music is literally like Bullet Club for life, which is NWO for life, as they would say back in the day. And the Elite were its own spin-off, which is an amazing story in the sense that it was the Young Bucks, Nick and Mac Jackson, and Kenny Omega, who started calling themselves the Elite of the Bullet Club, which they end up getting control of, because over the years, with how big the Bullet Club is in Japan, and when obviously AJ Styles, Gallows and Anderson left New Japan Pro Wrestling, ended up in WWE, they for years were like, we're the club, which without Bullet in it doesn't really work. They're just, what's the club mean? They're the OC, the original club, and it's like, well, it doesn't really work. You're still referencing something. Like I mentioned about Fortune and these things that reference something before, it can't live up to it. The same happened even when WWE does it, and that's, you can't.
The Balor Club briefly as well.
The what?
The Balor Club.
The Balor Club. My goodness. Right, and obviously that's because Finn Balor, Prince Devitt, was the original leader of the Bullet Club. And they should. Why didn't they do something where, like, they don't call themselves Balor Club, because AJ Styles wouldn't just join the Balor Club, but they should have just come up with something where they did their own version with its own name and was a big deal. Or they should have done some deal with New Japan so they could have used the term Bullet Club and sent some of their guys over there to cross over, because it would have just done great business for everyone. Why wouldn't have they done that? But they didn't. But anyway, so the Young Bucks, they called themselves the Elite, and they copyrighted it. So they actually control the Elite. And from that, you had the original members being the Elite of the Bullet Club, being the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega. Later joined by Marty Scurll, the villain. I was literally, I don't know where it is, wearing my Villain Club t-shirt a couple of days back. Who else do you have? Hangman Page, Adam Hangman Page, Cody Rhodes join it. And along the way, you get other people, just like at the moment, it's kind of like, is Matt Hardy part of the Elite? I'm not quite sure. But from the Elite, especially when Cody Rhodes got involved, and them all becoming great friends, saying that we could run a show of our own and it be a big 10,000 seat sellout thing, which they did, made it so that they got the connection, got the interest of Tony Khan, who led the Elite, joining together with Tony Khan to form All Elite Wrestling. And out of all of what the factions have achieved, so like I mentioned about the NWO, could have been its own brand. It would have still been owned by WCW and owned by Ted Turner. This is an example of a faction actually becoming a mainstream wrestling promotion, which has literally never happened before.
Absolutely. And so, like, I mean, go talk about the history of the stuff. You also back to, like, Japan in general, whose companies over there are pretty much based on stables. You look at New Japan, they've got, like I said, the Bullet Club.
Yeah.
They've got Chaos. They have Suzuki Gun, who are an amazing stable. They're great. Minoru Suzuki, just one of the legitimately badass people in the world of wrestling. If you've ever seen him wrestle, he's the scariest guy to look at, to see wrestle. Just would not mess with him. Got companies like Dragon Gate, whose entire company is based entirely on stable wars, gang wars and things like that. And you've got also Ring of Honor had a couple of really good stables as well for a little while. They had at one point they had that 2004-5 they had Generation Next, which would have been at some point or another they would have been a combination of people like Alex Shelley, Austin Aries.
Isn't Generation Next the former name of the Young Bucks in TNA?
Well, I missed all of that. Sorry, mate.
Oh, sorry, man. I was speaking over you. My bad. Wasn't Generation Next the name of the Young Bucks in TNA?
That was Generation Me.
Oh, Generation Me. I do apologise.
Yeah, but in Ring of Honor, there would have been like Austin Aries, Alex Shelley, Roderick Strong, Jack Evans, and Matt Sydal at various points in that group there. They also had another group that was called Scum, which was Kevin Steen when he sort of had his return. Kevin Owens now, as we know him. When he sort of was not. He sort of had a faction with Steve Carino and I've forgotten his name. What's the other guy's name? I've forgotten it. That was quite an interesting storyline as well to sort of bring him back because he's been exiled from Ring of Honor for about a year and things like that, and they sort of brought him back as part of this group there. Should we have a little very quick mention of some of the stables maybe didn't necessarily quite hit home and weren't necessarily as great?
Yeah, go for it.
First on my list would be the Dungeon of Doom, which I'm pretty sure I talked quite a lot about last week.
Yeah.
I didn't talk too much about them. Mentioned the Core already. Mentioned Immortal already from TNA. Who else do we have? The League of Nations. The League of Nations, Sheamus, Wade Barrett, Alberto Del Rio, and Rusev.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know why they existed in terms of what they were. I don't know what their role was. I don't know what their mission was. I don't know what their
whole thing was. Triple H brought them together to go against Roman Reigns when he was becoming the most popular or the most powerful person in WWE, I think.
Right. Okay. But I know they had that match at WrestleMania with the New Day, which wasn't very good.
Yeah, they were terrible.
That was a very bad faction. Spirit Squad. You know what? I didn't mind the Spirit Squad.
Oh, I'm not a fan. Not a fan.
Oh, man, I think the actual gimmick itself had some legs. Just the fact that the five of them didn't necessarily want to do it. That they weren't very good at their job, especially the one that wasn't really ever a wrestler at any point. Was it Mitch, who just never really wrestled at all?
Well, they were just like a rehash of the Mean Street Posse to me. Just like
you got all the Attitude Era, all those sort of things.
The Job
Gang
Squad,
Wars, like the DOA.
Yeah.
And the Truth Commission. Los Boricuas.
Yeah.
All that sort of stuff.
Okay, we spoke about the Nation of Domination a couple of weeks ago. That was a good faction. It would have been great if I still think they could bring it back. Obviously, when we say about some of these things now, we get lots of trios in wrestling, especially in AEW, like you say about SCU and the Jurassic Death Triangle. That was terrible. The Inner Circle, the Death Triangle, and I said that I actually tweeted them. They responded. I can't remember, but I said that the Librarians and someone else should be the Something Squares, but I forget what they were now. But yeah, there's so many. So I mentioned Camp Cornette earlier. I'm just bringing up a list so if there's anything we've missed. Camp Cornette. Now, Camp Cornette had Yokozuna, Owen Hart, the British Bulldog, Vader. For all intents and purposes, it was very successful. There was lots of great guys in it in the mid-90s. Let's see what else we've got. Triple X was Christopher Daniels, Elix Skipper, and Senshi in TNA.
Oh, they were great little combo. Yes,
yeah, great wrestlers there.
They were a byproduct of Sports Entertainment Extreme.
Yes,
Rich Russo's group, weren't they?
And
Sports Entertainment Extreme, SEX.
So here we've got...
Girls have sex, they'll love it, they'll love it.
So Santana and Ortiz are the Latin American exchange, but they can't use the name because it's a TNA name where it was Homicide and Hernandez and Conan. Yeah, before this. So there's been a few others here. I'm just looking up Apollo, Machete, Hector Guerrero apparently was part of that. Anyone else? The main event Mafia you mentioned. What was the equivalent?
Mafia, yes. Colin Whitten has mentioned the main event Mafia. Yes.
Okay, so who was the main event Mafia? Sting,
Booker T, Kurt Angle, Kevin Nash, and Sting. Sorry, you said Sting.
Yeah. Wasn't the idea though that they were all heels, but Sting was a face?
You're right, Sam Steiner. Yes, you're right. Yeah, and Sting was sort of like never really like properly a heel. There was a storyline where he sort of was trying to get him to do good. He won like outright leadership.
Yeah.
In a match, and then said, "Okay, we're going to do this good stuff. We're going to do this stuff out here." And then immediately turned on him.
The main event Mafia. That name, it sounds rubbish, to be honest. And to me, it reminds me of towards the end of WCW. They tried to do a feud. They didn't have the NWO anymore, but they had the Millionaires Club, which were meant to be the good guys. All of the old wrestlers, Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, Scott Steiner, and people like this, who even then, they still wrestled for another decade. They weren't that old, comparatively, but they were trying to push the idea that they were old. The Millionaires Club against the New Blood. And there was this amazing thing where the New Blood, which was all of like the young guys, it was like Vampiro and Billy Kidman, and I'm trying to remember who else was, Jeff Jarrett, and all these people in the New Blood. And there was this thing where Kevin Nash is in the ring, and whoever was cutting the promo was like, and that's why you won't defeat the New Blood. And suddenly just blood poured down all over him, except it missed. It just went like, and splattered the ground, and a tiny bit just went like on Nash's cheek. But he was out of position, obviously.
Or that never been on Botchamania? I've never seen that clip.
Oh my god. It was like they dropped blood on it. Oh, it was Vince Russo saying it. New Blood! And it just went, whoosh, and it like maybe just caught a tiny bit on his shoulder. It completely missed him.
Wow.
It was so bad. And that fizzled out when everything went wrong between Bischoff and Russo, and then the New Blood didn't exist anymore. But the Millionaires Club, you can't have the good guys be the old guys where it's like, well, we're rich. That doesn't make any sense. I'm trying to see. Kings of Wrestling, who was that?
Oh yeah, that was
Chris
Cesaro,
Hero. Yes, Cesaro. Yeah, so that would have been a Ring of Honor group. Four
they had a couple
Horsemen
of people in that stable as well, in various carnations, from Shikara and Ring of Honor, like people like
one that more significant one that we haven't mentioned is Raven's Flock.
Barry Sweeney.
Raven's done a few versions of his Flock where got like Billy Kidman from it. I think he had a version of his Nest or something in TNA, which may have had CM Punk in it at one point.
Yeah, the Nest. He also had another group called Serotonin.
Yeah. So he's led a few factions, which are all very grungy in that. But I think shall we just mention if there's any, because there's one big one which we actually haven't spoken about, which is Extreme Improv, which is Degeneration X. So this might be the place to end. I think we can all agree that, and say if there's any like differences on this, but I think the biggest factions of all time will be where we started with the Four Horsemen. It's going to be the NWO, but then the other one, and is there anything else that's in the same league as these three? But the other one is Degeneration X. I think they're the three biggest, most famous of all time, and anything else, even if you're talking Bullet Club or Evolution, all of these things, they're like a massive drop down. But the other big one is Degeneration X. Sam, tell us your thoughts.
Well, obviously, my main memory of it is the reincarnation with just Triple H and Shawn Michaels, where they're essentially a comedy team who feuded with the Spirit Squad. My favourite moment was when Shawn Michaels was being told by Triple H to be more aggressive. And so it was like, okay, this guy, what's your name? He goes, oh, Kenny, Superkick. Do you like that now? I just Superkick Kenny. And like, his paint were flying everywhere, and yeah, they were a very, very funny team when it was just the two of them. But obviously, I kind of know a little bit about the old Degeneration X, and I wish that I knew a bit more about them, and I was around more at the time when they came out. But yeah, so I don't even know the kind of reincarnated version.
Yeah, but like during the reincarnated version, they had Hornswoggle, who was kind of like an unofficial extra member.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so they were a lot more comedy because it was more like the PG era, and they would have fun referencing about, oh, we've got to be more PG now. And I love the fact that DX will break the fourth wall like that. They will kind of acknowledge, oh, we can't do this. Or Shawn Michaels, I think someone mentioned a week or two ago that, oh, Shawn Michaels not allowed to involve in sin because now he's all religious and stuff like that. So he'd disappear off. But yeah, D-Generation X, I remember, like, I was like you said, Sam, earlier about the reverence we speak about Bret Hart and the Hart Foundation. I was always Team Bret. When there was Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart's feud, real life, whatever, I was Team Bret. And like, just like the values I was brought up on, you know, despite whatever else we know about people's personal lives and stuff like this, I grew up and like, I liked Superman and I liked Hulk Hogan. So I'd say my prayers, eat my vitamins and drink my milk. And, you know, believe in myself and all this other stuff. So then when Hulk Hogan wasn't the thing and it was Bret Hart, and they were literally, he's all about respect. When there was this thing and it was like Shawn Michaels and Chyna and Triple H and then Rick Rude a little bit, and they're like swearing and pulling down their pants and stuff like that, I was like, this is disgusting! This is no place in wrestling! What is this? Why are they doing this? And it was like, when you had like, classic 1997 D-Generation X, that's when they were there. What they became when Shawn Michaels left was even watered down compared to what they were the first time. They were like, you can see promos they'd cut where literally every few words they are swearing, but when they'd put it on TV they just censored the hell out of it. But there's like one where it's like, we will no longer say the following words, swear, 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 swear. And Triple H's like, you can't say that. He's like, oh, F you, blah, blah, blah. And it's great. They were so incredibly edgy. It was like they took what NWO were doing and dialed it up to 25. It was like so much more. And just the idea that they were playing the cool heels, and they were getting a feud with Sergeant Slaughter, and they'd say, well, Sergeant Slaughter, every time you speak, you spit, and so they'd be wearing like riot gear with like windscreen wipers on it and stuff like this. And obviously they played into the whole everything we've spoke about before with the Montreal screw job. But then Shawn Michaels had to retire, and D-Generation X was effectively dead in the water because the leader of it was gone. And now it was just Triple H with Chyna. But I believe the night after WrestleMania when Steve Austin won the belt, I think it was the night after, if not a week later, X-Pac came back to WWF. He'd been 1, 2, 3 kid, he'd then gone to be 6 in WCW, part of the NWO. He came back to WWF with Triple H, and it was like D-Generation X is still a thing. And within a few weeks, there was this association starting with Badass Billy Gunn and Road Dogg, who were kind of like a almost jobber tag team, who became the New Age Outlaws, who obviously their personalities, especially Road Dogg's, because he's incredibly good on the mic, was able to start getting his shtick together, and it fit in perfectly so that you'd get this tandem led by Triple H, with Chyna on the side, with X-Pac there, and with the New Age Outlaws. Is there anyone else? I haven't missed anyone else from that era, have I? Howard Finkel. But yeah, so there was D-Generation X, and then they famously did the thing where they invaded WCW, which the thing that's terrible about it, they turned up in, it wasn't a tank, it was a truck, but they'd got like a big gun turret thing on it, as if they'd got a tank. They'd got their megaphones, and they were wearing their camouflage and everything, as if they were going to invade WCW. Eric Bischoff, in years since, has said that if he had known, he would have let them in. Because imagine if I was WCW, I'd have let them in. I'd have been like, film everything, you know. And you could have not necessarily riled, but rallied up some of the WCW guys. Be like, either make it seem like these guys are joining us, or, you know, because it's your paycheck, get them to beat these guys up or whatever. And it would have been great TV, but instead the WCW security kept them out, and the WCW guys, like the office, didn't even know they were there. But that was something big on the fact that WWE turned up to WCW, and WCW wouldn't meet them for the fight. But, yeah. Any other thoughts, Dave? D-Generation X?
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of gone through like all the phases of them and sort of seen every like phases you brought up and sort of the formation of them originally and all that sort of stuff. And like I say, I was sort of on the way out of wrestling a little bit when they sort of started forming. This is when all the 2-hour Raw started, and it was all getting a bit raunchy, and I didn't necessarily like the way it was going, and sort of like a little bit off on the side of Brett, as you say.
Yeah.
So I think some of it is, as obviously stood the test, some of it stood the test of time, and a lot of it hasn't. I think that DX impersonating the Nation is still one of the most really not okay things that's ever been broadcast.
But Jason's sensation as Owen Hart was brilliant.
Sorry, go on.
Jason's sensation as Owen Hart was brilliant.
Jason's sensation as Owen Hart is fine, but when you've got other guys in the group that are essentially doing blackface, it's not great. So there were some things I think that maybe hadn't stood the test of time very well. I think the New Age Outlaws are one of the most overrated teams of all time. And they're certainly one of the most over teams of all time, but overrated as well. I think some of the stuff that they were doing at that point as well, just in this sort of day and age, just hasn't worked. And there was that little run when Triple H was like the leader of the, when they sort of reformed them in like 1999, 2000. They sort of had that run where they were part of the, when the power couple thing with Tunner and Stephanie. DX was on top of the thing, and they had some really awkward segments on Raw and SmackDown and things like that, where they're all just backstage eating hummus and all this sort of stuff. It was just really odd. So I think that the DX are one of those sort of groups and names that has been really like held up in high esteem by WWE in terms of their history and things like that. But when you actually go back and look at some of the stuff, it's very selective. Some of the stuff they choose to highlight.
Yeah, true, fair. No, I think that's completely fair. Absolutely, some of the stuff they've done perhaps doesn't hold up, like you say. Very good point. I would say that they, well, okay. So when we talk about their legacy and everything, you can't really get around the fact that perhaps the way they've been held up is just because Triple H is part of it. So of course it's going to get the reunions and the mentions and the kudos and everything. But I would say that for the most part their legacy is deserved. And certainly I would say, other than perhaps there was some questionable things where they're pushing things to be edgy or whatever, they perhaps didn't have like the downside, like we talk about the NWO B team, or being led by Vincent versus Scott Norton or something terrible like this. I'd say that DX, the like Rick Rude obviously was part of it at the beginning, but the amount of people that have been in it are very, very select, and it's kept it like, and New Age Outlaws, they're not the greatest team of all time. They were there, like to the point that I even forgot them when I mentioned about Too Cool and the Hardys and the Dudleys and stuff like that when I was saying about the great teams. I didn't even think of DX as like a supporting act, but they were consistently there. But in terms of New Age Outlaws, they were a gimmick. They worked because they were a bigger part of that stable, because before they were part of that stable, New Age Outlaws weren't really working. But when they got the gimmick, it really worked. Billy Gunn is like the ultimate tag team wrestler. When he's a singles wrestler, it doesn't really work. When he's a part of a tag team, it usually does work, which is an interesting thing with Billy Gunn. But yeah, and obviously China was very, very unique, so being part of that, there was lots of things about it that would like stand out aspects of the group.
Yeah, 100%. I won't discount everything that is positive about them. I think China is actually one of the more sort of undervalued members of DX, considering like you look back at some of that stuff and the reactions she got were absolutely incredible by today's standards. And and it's a shame that she's sort of not held in sort of like a higher esteem. But like you say, because of the stuff that happens now with Triple H and Stephanie and whatnot being the high power people in the company they are, and she's not necessarily as looked upon as fondly because of obviously reasons. So, but certainly won't discount any of that stuff. And as I say, those are the three big stables: the Horsemen, the NWO, and DX.
Yeah. Wow. Anything else to add, Sam?
No.
Excellent. On that point, we will
I'll add one thing. We forgot about the Forgotten Sons.
Probably best to be forgotten.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so on that note, we will wrap things up. So thank you very much. This has been Superkick Mania Pro Wrestling Podcast. Whose turn is it to choose what we do talk about?
I believe it's next week.
Do you have an idea, Dave?
I do. I think we're going to have another trip back to the world of independent wrestling, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
The one I've talked about before on the show. Going to have a little look at Riptide Wrestling.
Ooh.
From Brighton. They are cinematic pro wrestling, and we'll decide off air if we're going to do a watch along or just watch the show at some point at our own convenience or what have you, and just report back on what we watch and things like that. But yeah, I thought we'd have a look at the 2018 Riptide Rumble.
Okay, sounds
show,
good.
Which is a show I attended live.
Right.
You might be able to see or hear me in the crowd. So it's really interesting to see working out bits that I might have contributed to the show or not. So yeah. But yeah, we'll have a look at the Riptide Rumble. I'll let you know. I'll give you guys the details how to get it. But we'll decide off air if we want to do a watch along or do it as a sort of report.
Okay, fantastic. So at that point, Sam, where can the people find you?
You can find me in all of the usual places, which are about to appear behind me now. There they are. You can find me on Facebook, Sam George Performer. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram, as always, at Samuel O. George.
Oh, George. Dave, where can we find you?
Find me on Twitter at Degrino, and if you want to do my performing stuff, then that's great. Twitter at D_Anthony_Green on Twitter, or Instagram at David Anthony Green.
Okay.
Facebook, David Anthony Green as well.
Cool. My name is David Postansky. You can find me at David Postansky on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, spelled Pustansky. And of course, this is the Superkick Mania Pro Wrestling Podcast. There is its own Twitter at Superkick Mania, and it's part of the Extreme Improv Podcast Network. So do check out everything Extreme Improv. If you're watching this along anywhere, then do click the subscribe on YouTube, which is youtube.com/Extreme Improv. Facebook.com/Extreme Improv. We're also on Twitch.tv/Extreme Improv, Mixer, and other stuff. Dave is already tuning up the band. Sam, okay, I'm just going to sell it this week because I can't do the kick. In fact, I'm going to miss a kick, and then you guys hit me with one. Okay, so that way.
You just want to replicate what Sam did on the show yesterday.
What, just fall over? Right, ready? So I'm going to miss one. So, and...